One morning, several students were there to donate blood. The place was very crowded, and it was strange to see so many teenagers so willing to donate blood. One of the nurses commented that there were also many more kids from other schools there, but she said it was a really good thing, and very admirable of them. However, there was a line in the back where a kid was selling blood donation certificates for 5,000 won each. He also accepted trades from people who already had certificate cards. The boy bought 10,001 cards and sold them for 5,000. It was not really a loss, because his real goal was the donation certificate. The hidden value of one of those certificates was around 12,000 won. He was the supplier, already negotiating with a seller who wanted to buy a large quantity of them, but there was a reason nobody sold them openly. It was a crime. Still, for a minor like him, even if he got caught, he would only receive a warning. Violence, robbery, fraud, prostitution, even murder. Juvenile crime was always forgiven. The law could never really punish him. The police did not care either, but that did not mean the job was easy. At that moment, he got a stomp to the face. When someone committed a crime, it also meant becoming a target for other crimes. People who made money through crime could not ask anyone for help. They never received kindness or sympathy. One of the bullies stepped on his face and asked how much money he had made that day. Then, he was dragged into a corner to be beaten. The bully farted in his face, smoked a cigarette, and spit on him. He was disgusting. But the bully had even worse news for him. Jo Chang-soo was coming to the school. He was the leader of a juvenile gang in the area. Everyone had suffered because of him, even if only indirectly, and nobody dared to call themselves a victim because they were afraid of the retaliation and the overwhelming power he had. He was a huge brute who looked more like a mutant, and he was being released from a juvenile rehabilitation center. The kid who was getting beaten said that they should at least show some respect. Jo Chang-soo was not anyone's friend, not even the friends who were standing there. Even so, the bully replied that they should at least collect the tax. Nobody wanted to get on Jo Chang-soo's bad side. The boy said that was fine, and that he would get the money from his backpack. Instead, he pulled out his middle finger and showed it to that idiot. The bully answered with a kick to the young criminal's stomach. After beating him up, he picked up a shovel and said that they could bury him right there that day. But the others in his group warned him to be careful, because he could end up in the rehabilitation center too. He replied that the center was nothing, and that it was only a bluff, because he would never go to a real prison. Then, he asked Lee Min-soo if he was not going to hand over what he had, and said he would make sure Min-soo remembered him while lying in the hospital. But at that moment, someone kicked him from behind, right in the spine. The attacker looked like a much older student. He politely asked them not to commit any school violence. Apparently, he was the student council president, and he had come to rescue Lee Min-soo. One of the guys wondered who he was, and said that the president was acting tough just because he was not wearing glasses. The other bully stood up, still holding the shovel, and tried to kill the student council president, but kill was probably too strong a word. Kang Yu-sung managed to disarm him and throw him to the ground. Then, he asked whether the bully had ever killed anyone before, and whether he really thought he could handle the weight of a life, the weight of a death. As he said that, he twisted the smoker's arm. The other bullies tried to protect their supposed leader, but the student council president knocked them all down without any trouble. He was not only fast, he also knew how to fight. After beating everyone down, Lee Min-soo asked if Kang Yu-sung was not supposed to be avoiding school violence. Kang Yu-sung, the president, replied that Min-soo should not say something like that, and that he should at least thank his brother. Min-soo answered that Yu-sung was not his brother anymore, and should stay out of his business. There was no reason for Kang Yu-sung to stay close to trash like him, or he would end up getting contaminated too. Kang Yu-sung insisted that Min-soo was not trash but his brother. No matter what Min-soo thought, they would always be brothers. Min-soo then told him that he should at least get rid of that watch already. He had been adopted by a rich family, and kept buying new watches. Kang Yu-sung asked what was wrong with the watch, and also asked about his classes. Min-soo answered that he was not going to class, and would skip it. Kang Yu-sung said that the idiot seriously thought Min-soo should change his watch too. On the way home, Min-soo wondered why that guy had gotten involved. Maybe Kang Yu-sung would not even be able to get into college because of him. His brother Kang Yu-sung was the student council president, and had already been accepted early into a medical school in Korea. Meanwhile, Lee Min-soo was the biggest troublemaker in the school. They were blood brothers. His brother's original name had been Lee Haeun-soo, but he had been adopted by a wealthy family and was now called Kang Yu-sung. Meanwhile, Min-soo was still living at the Penguin Orphanage. That was why he thought his brother should stop getting involved with him. Min-soo did not want to become a burden or hold his brother's life back. Lee Haeun-soo was supposed to follow a golden path, while Min-soo needed to find his own way. Even in that alley filled with trash and discarded clothes, he knew there was still a way to survive. The money he had worked so hard to collect was inside his backpack. He had at least 340,000 won. To reach 1 million, he still needed another 660,000 won. That was why he would continue his business of selling blood donation certificate cards. He was obsessed with money because, in 2 years, he would have to leave the orphanage. The government gave him 5 million won, but that was barely enough to pay the deposit for a place to live. Maybe he should find a part-time job right away, but nobody would want to hire a minor orphan like him. He committed crimes, but that was the only way he had to make money quickly, and he did all of it so he would not become a burden to his brother. However, right when he closed his locker, the bully from earlier appeared to steal all his money, or perhaps to do something even worse. The next morning at school, Kang Yusung was focused on his studies when the teacher came in with an announcement. He informed the class that Jo Chang-soo, who had been at the rehabilitation center, had returned. Apparently, he had reflected enough, and the teacher asked everyone to cooperate so that he could readjust to school life. The students said that things were about to get crazy, that the teacher was going to lose his mind, and that everyone would be terrified of Jo Chang-soo. After all, he would probably go right back to being the same delinquent he had been before. But when he appeared, everyone was shocked, including Kang Yusung. Jo Chang-soo had been the leader of a juvenile cartel with unstoppable strength, a true beast, and one of the worst kinds of people imaginable. Yet he came back looking like a baby. In fact, he seemed completely out of his mind and clearly deeply affected. A caretaker was pushing him in a wheelchair, and he even wet his pants as soon as he arrived. He had gone through the Juvenile Rehabilitation Act. The controversial Juvenile Act had been repealed, and juvenile offenders were now being sent to military facilities for rehabilitation training. The length of their education was decided based on when the students were considered to have completed their mental rehabilitation. However, judging by Jo Chang-soo, the program did not seem to be working very well. On his way home, Kang Yusung passed right in front of the orphanage where he used to live. Apparently, several people were gathered there, including police officers and doctors. An accident had happened. Kang Yusung got out of the car to see what was going on and noticed his brother's watch. People were saying that a murder had happened and that the crime had been committed by a child from the orphanage. Some people were worried that the incident would lower property values, while others said they were against the existence of the orphanage. Kang Yusung told them to move out of the way because he was looking for his brother. That was when he realized his brother was not the victim. Under Article 243 of the Juvenile Rehabilitation Act, Lee Min-soo had been caught in the act and arrested. From that moment on, the minor's identity would be placed under the responsibility of the Military Rehabilitation Center. Of course, he was taken to court. The judge said that his case was hopeless because Lee Min-soo showed no sign of remorse. The judge also reminded him that he was there on a murder charge. Min-soo answered that he had not killed anyone and that he had already said that several times, but nobody listened to him. The judge said that he was lying, just like always, and asked how he explained the fingerprints and blood found on the brick that had supposedly been used as the murder weapon. The judge also asked whether Min-soo had not committed all the other crimes he was accused of. He said he had seen many people like that boy before, always blaming their circumstances, their families, or the situation they lived in. To him, they were hopeless cases. Whenever things did not go the way they wanted, they played the victim. According to the judge, nobody committed a crime while carrying the kind of genuine remorse that Min-soo claimed to have. He then asked whether Min-soo had killed someone because that person had intimidated him, or because they had taken his money. If someone could kill another person simply because they did not like them, the world would be overflowing with corpses. Because of that, the judge said Min-soo needed to learn a lesson right then. If someone bothered him, he should ask an adult for help. In the judge's view, he had only committed those crimes because he did not trust adults. So, Lee Min-soo was sentenced to detention at the Juvenile Rehabilitation Center, a place known for being practically hell on earth. The new inmates arrived at the rehabilitation center by bus, but the trip seemed to have no end. The place was so far from the metropolitan area that there were nothing but mountains all around. Some of them were shouting that they needed to use the bathroom, but the police officers answered that they were almost there and would arrive soon. They would have plenty of time to take care of their business once they arrived. When the new inmates finally got there, they asked why everything looked so destroyed on that side. Then they saw the girls' detention area, and of course, they immediately became interested. The girls, on the other hand, could not have looked more disgusted. One of the police officers explained that it was the female detention center and that the boys would not be allowed inside. One of them commented that he could not sleep without women, while another replied that he had never even done that in his life. Lee Min-soo, however, was the only one who was not excited at all, mainly because he had not committed the murder. When they finally arrived, the new inmates were gathered in the courtyard. One of them kept insisting that he wanted to smoke a cigarette, but the police officer explained that, unfortunately, he would not be allowed to. The guards remained on alert the entire time, without fighting back or yelling at the inmates. Suddenly, several inmates from the center appeared with red letters marked across their chests, screaming like animals and squealing like pigs. The scene was so strange that it seriously shocked the newcomers at first. After a while, though, some of them started laughing at the situation. That was when the police officer ordered everyone to freeze and called the platoon to attention. Instantly, all the marked inmates stopped screaming and formed ranks. The police officer ordered everyone to show respect to the director of the rehabilitation center and told them all to stand at attention. The inmates continued squealing like pigs while the police officers also took their positions. Then, the director of the rehabilitation center appeared. The newcomers commented that they hated the military and did not understand why those inmates were squealing like animals. The whole thing seemed completely bizarre. The director of the rehabilitation center then ordered them to bow. The newcomers could not believe they would actually obey that man's command and said they were not going to bow to him. But the inmates with red letters on their chests bent their bodies and planted their heads on the ground, bowing to the director of the rehabilitation center. The newcomers became even more frightened by what they had just seen and wondered if those inmates had really done it on purpose. The director of the rehabilitation center asked if they did not know the Youth Rights Charter and then called them all pigs. The inmates answered by squealing like pigs. pigs. Then, the director of the rehabilitation center gave the order and said they had 10 minutes to turn those pests into livestock. One of the newcomers had no idea what the hell was happening and said that if the director kept talking like that, he was going to get punched in the face. But before he could do anything, one of the inmates marked with a letter struck him in the face. The marked inmate started beating all the newcomers, following the director's orders and turning the new arrivals into livestock. Lee Min-soo was the first to throw himself onto the ground to avoid getting beaten. The director of the rehabilitation center said they had done such a good job that the pigs had now become nothing more than slaves. From that moment on, they were allowed to speak human words again. The inmates answered that they understood and agreed. Then, they gave the director of the rehabilitation center a grateful salute and thanked him for the training. Lee Min-soo kept wondering what kind of situation this was. Everything was completely bizarre. He knew that, in a place like this, pretending to be dead was probably the best strategy possible. In the meantime, he would try to assess the situation. There were simply too many enemies to deal with at once. But there was something even stranger. The police officers were smiling during the whole situation, with almost glowing smiles on their faces. They could have helped, but they were not helping. In fact, they were helping beat the newcomers with their batons. They had finally revealed their true identities. They were no longer staying on the defensive and had started beating the new arrivals too, releasing all the insults, frustration, and irritation they had been holding inside. Lee Min-soo realized that it was probably an intimidation tactic meant to keep everyone under control. The police officers used force in a subtle way, with exaggerated movements, but they were not beating anyone with the intention of killing them. They were simply exaggerating their show of strength to keep the newcomers under control. After all, it was natural. Most people did not want to become murderers, and almost nobody had the courage to kill someone, much less Min-soo. Then, the director of the rehabilitation center personally approached Lee Min-soo and said that he was pretty smart. He had just arrived and had already managed to avoid most of the chaos. Lee Min-soo tried to apologize, but the director stepped on his face and said there was no need to apologize. He liked dealing with rats, just like Lee Min-soo. The director of the rehabilitation center asked if Lee Min-soo was going to keep entertaining him and called him a rat again. He said that from that moment on, Min-soo had to speak like a rat. While ordering Lee Min-soo to make rat noises, he continued stepping on his face. The guards followed the orders and put everyone into formation. Those who had survived the beating were lined up wearing nothing but their underwear. Lee Min-soo was the last one to be thrown onto the sandy ground. The director of the rehabilitation center then announced that the evaluation would begin from that moment on. The police officers were already prepared with their batons to give them a proper evaluation. Meanwhile, Kang Yu-sung was breaking into an apartment at the perfect time, when there was probably nobody home. He was using only simple tools, such as scissors. When he was much younger, he and his brother had often broken into houses. Lee Min-soo would stand watch in the hallway while Kang Yu-sung went inside and stole anything valuable, until the police caught them and took them to the orphanage. They spent years breaking into houses, and because of that, they could empty an entire house of valuable items in just 5 minutes. Kang Yu-sung had not done anything like that in a long time, and even found it strange to be breaking into that apartment. But he was not there to steal anything. He only wanted answers about his brother. He was inside Jo Chang-soo's home, where Jo Chang-soo was tied to a bed and screaming nonsense, saying that he had wet his pants. Kang Yu-sung asked what kind of rehabilitation center could turn someone like him into that. He was told that Jo Chang-soo had ended up that way after falling from a high place and hitting his head, but there were no broken bones or any other visible injuries. Something else had happened. Jo Chang-soo used to be so fearless that even the police avoided confronting him, but now he looked completely lobotomized. Kang Yu-sung pressured Jo Chang-soo, saying that only 4 weeks had passed and his brother might never get out of that place. He then asked again what had happened to him. Jo Chang-soo could only answer that the shock hurt and that he had made a mistake. To him, everything came down to the shock. Kang Yu-sung realized that the visit had been nothing but a waste of time. That was when he noticed something strange on Jo Chang-soo's chest, a red mark shaped like a letter. At that moment, all the newcomers were being marked with letters ranging from B, C, and D. But the director of the rehabilitation center congratulated the rat, Lee Min-soo, because he was much more violent than he looked. Because of that, he had been placed in Group A, making him the only newcomer in that category. The director of the rehabilitation center assured him that he was going to have a wonderful time there. Lee Min-soo was in Group A because he had been classified as a murderer. The next morning, at the school entrance, some girls were impressed by Kang Yu-sung, saying that he was ridiculously handsome. They approached him to ask for his number, maybe even one of his social media accounts, such as Instagram, but he politely answered that he did not use social media. The girls became even more captivated by his smile and even asked for his address. Kang Yu-sung, however, took the opportunity to ask for some information. He was looking for a girl named Ga Semin. The girls answered that she was actually that crazy girl who was leaving the school while wearing a motorcycle helmet. They also said that Ga Semin had just been released from the rehabilitation center. Kang Yu-sung walked straight toward her, which was completely unexpected, mainly because he was so direct. He said he wanted to know more about the rehabilitation center, but Ga Semin simply pushed him out of the way and told him to leave. That was when Kang Yu-sung explained that his younger brother was inside. She walked over to the motorcycle, and Kang Yu-sung realized that he had been way too direct. Maybe next time, he would try a different approach. But Ga Semin threw a motorcycle helmet at him and told him to get on, explaining that it was not the right place to talk about that kind of thing. On the way, Kang Yu-sung asked why she had changed her mind. Ga Samin replied that her brother was also trapped in that place. Then Kang Yu-sung asked what kind of place the rehabilitation center was. She simply answered that it was basically hell. Meanwhile, the rookies were going through training that had already lasted 3 hours. Then another session began. Everyone's bodies, including Lee Min-soo's, seemed to be crying out in pain after all that training and all those beatings. When the rehabilitation center director ordered them to do jumping jacks, they all started screaming like pigs, while Lee Min-soo made rat noises, since that was how he was treated. Then came squats, followed by the crouched walk. Lee Min-soo thought they had already been training for 3 hours, and that he had no idea when this crap was going to end. The rehabilitation center director, on the other hand, loved it. He enjoyed hearing those sounds of pain and said that they always sounded very sweet to him. At that moment, one of the prisoners fell down. The officers explained that whenever someone fell, everyone had to start over. The boy started begging to use the bathroom because his stomach hurt badly. The officer asked if that was all he had to say while kicking him in the stomach. Then the rehabilitation center director asked if the officer was beating him just because he wanted to use the bathroom. The boy had probably held it in for as long as he could before finally asking, so the rehabilitation center director told him not to worry and said he could get up. He knew it was difficult and even offered his hand to help him go to the bathroom. Lee Min-soo, however, realized that something was wrong. The prisoners were lined up to use the bathroom while everyone else had to return to training. Lee Min-soo thought none of it made any sense. They were letting some of them use the bathroom while the others kept training. It was a completely unfair system. Soon, everyone could simply pretend they had a stomachache. The others started celebrating because they had finally managed to get a break. Lee Min-soo realized they were already finding another way to stall the officers. It looked very suspicious. The rehabilitation center director then commented that more cattle were joining the line and that this was a rare opportunity for them. Lee Min-soo realized they were not letting it happen that easily. Unconditional kindness was like an unnamed fruit found in the forest. The sweeter and more tempting it looked, the more carefully it had to be approached, because it could be poisonous. Then Lee Min-soo raised his hand and started speaking like a rat. The officer told him to speak like a man, calling him an idiot. Lee Min-soo replied that he did not want to go to the bathroom anymore and that he was fine. He said he wanted to return to training. The officer asked if he was joking and whether it looked like a joke. While already grabbing him by the neck, Lee Min-soo replied that he was fine and had simply been using his muscles for too long. Because of that, he had confused exhaustion with the urge to use the bathroom. The officer ordered him to return to training. The others waiting in line wondered what that idiot was doing. Lee Min-soo thought they were treating everyone like animals, but at the same time, they were offering them a break to use the bathroom. It made no sense. Cattle did not use bathrooms. The officer led everyone who needed to use the bathroom away. The rehabilitation center director said that both humans and animals obviously needed to relieve themselves, and that it must have been hard for them to hold it in. Some of the ones who stayed behind for training became jealous, regretting that they had not gone to the bathroom. Lee Min-soo, however, did not regret his decision. When everyone gathered to go to the bathroom, the rehabilitation center director asked what they were laughing about. Then he announced that they were dismissed. Those who were still training were also dismissed. From that moment on, everyone who had asked to use the bathroom had to form a human centipede. Lee Min-soo knew centipedes well. They were arthropods from the class Chilopoda, whose basic characteristic was having several pairs of legs. Some species had far more than that. To him, it was a creature far inferior to humans and animals, something disgusting and repulsive. Then they forced all the other recruits to shove their faces into the butt of the recruit in front of them, creating a kind of endless plank, with each person's face pressed against someone else's butt. The rehabilitation center director walked past some of them, kicking them in the stomach and making them vomit. Then the officers followed the rehabilitation center director and kicked those insects, saying that 3 hours of training did not deserve a bathroom break. After that, they were washed down with a hose. 3 hours earlier, they had been beasts, wild and fearless, but now they were timidly trying to avoid punishment, and the day was not over yet. The alarm sounded, and the rehabilitation center director ordered everyone to clean themselves up and go back inside. The officers were supposed to feed the cattle, and the feed had to be properly given. Later, Lee Min-soo had his tray, but it looked like leftovers. It did not look like food, but whatever, right? There was also something strange about it. They were eating on the floor. Only the recruits were eating on the floor, while the other prisoners were not. In fact, they were not even given utensils. One of the guards said that, from now on, they would sing the gratitude song. The recruits did not know the song, but the prisoners who already knew it sang loudly, saying that they were not humans, but dogs and pigs, and that they would eat whatever they were given. Lee Min-soo noticed that it was written on the wall. The lyrics were right there, and they had to memorize them, but he did not care at all. Whether he was an animal or not, he wanted to survive, so he shoved a bunch of rice into his mouth while trying to memorize the lyrics. At sunset, Ga Semin took Kang Yu-sung to see the view of the juvenile rehabilitation center. From far away, the place already looked huge. Ga Semin admitted that she went there every day because she kept thinking about her brother. Kang Yu-sung replied that his little brother was actually waiting for trial and would probably end up there soon. Then he asked whether she really thought that place was hell. She replied that hell might actually be better because it would probably treat humans better. Ga Semin had nightmares every day about what happened there and could not sleep without medication. She also told Kang Yusung that he must care a lot about his brother since he had gone looking for him. He answered that it had been his mother's last wish for him to protect his brother. That was why he had gone to see her, trying to do something before it was too late. Of all the people who had left that place, she was the only one who did not seem crazy. Then Ga Semin asked whether he wanted to know how she had survived. Kang Yusung asked if there was really a way and how she had managed to leave the rehabilitation center in one piece. She made a stupid-looking face, pretending to be an idiot, but he did not believe her, so she explained that she had been pretending to be an idiot and that she was not joking. A person had to pretend to be stupid in order to survive. Then Ga Semin showed her scalp. Under her long curly hair were burn scars. She explained that the place was basically a gathering of the craziest people in the country. Whenever tempers flared, fights broke out. It was full of unbelievable lunatics. She had never thought she would see someone shove their head into hot oil. Kang Yusong apologized, saying he had not known she had gone through that, and that she did not have to say anything else if she did not want to. Ga Semin replied that she had pretended to be an idiot, which was why she had gotten out of there early, before she actually went crazy. That advice probably would not help him much, but she told him to fix that look on his face and stop feeling sorry for her. However, Kang Yusong had also asked about the writing marked on the chest of that other boy, Jo Chang-soo, who had returned from the rehabilitation center. Ga Semin explained that, after the joint induction ceremony for the male and female training centers, the recruits were given a shower, a meal, and a set of clothes. Then, to prevent them from escaping, a GPS collar was placed around each of their necks. Lee Min-soo was trying on the clothes and realized that, at least, they were actually pretty good. They fit his body well. He just did not know what the thing around his neck was. The guard told them not to get distracted while standing in line, and they answered by squealing like pigs. Lee Min-soo answered like a rat. After receiving their belongings, each person was assigned to a room. The juvenile offenders were categorized according to the seriousness of their crimes, and their rooms were assigned based on that classification. Class E was for simple assault, D was for drug-related crimes, and C was for robbery and fraud. Ga Semin herself had been in room B for serious assault. She told Kang Yusong that his brother was probably in room A, which was reserved for murder cases. Lee Min-soo was taken to a room where there seemed to be more adults than teenagers. At that moment, he entered because of a murder charge, and found himself in a room packed with killers. Everyone gave him dirty looks as soon as he walked in. One of the big guys asked how Lee Min-soo dared to enter without introducing himself, and wanted to know where he was from, what his name was, and what had brought him there. Lee Min-soo thought those were actually pretty good questions, and answered that he had come from Penguin Orphanage. The others commented that he had come from an orphanage, and ended up in juvenile detention, calling it an elite career for a kid. But the long-haired guy standing behind them told everyone to shut up, and asked why Lee Min-soo was there. If he was in room A, he must have caused a lot of trouble. Lee Min-soo answered that he was there for murder. The others became a little scared, and said that there was finally a killer in the room. Lee Min-soo wondered if he was the only murderer there. He thought they were grouped together based on similar crimes. Murder was the worst one. Maybe the seriousness of the crime also determined how much power each person had inside the center. One of them said that, in that case, it looked like someone had gotten stuck as the new guy. Lee Min-soo thought he was talking about the long-haired guy, who seemed to be the leader, but in reality, the new guy was the boy being used as the leader's chair. He was kicked right after that, and he was not simply kicked away, he was seriously beaten. Lee Min-soo realized that nothing would change. The weak were bullied by the strong, whether outside or inside the rehabilitation center, but he would not let anyone walk all over him. He would rather embrace being treated like a murderer if it meant having some power inside the center. At 7 o'clock that evening, Lee Min-soo started his reflection essay. The young people at the rehabilitation center had to write 10 self-reflection essays every day, and Lee Min-soo had not even killed anyone, so he had no idea what to write. At that moment, Lee Min-soo noticed that the others in the room were using the papers to make paper airplanes. They did not care about that stupid self-reflection essay at all, because the new guy was writing all of them. They told him that he should leave that job to the new guy too, and the new guy responded like a dog, asking to go to the bathroom and making animal sounds. Lee Min-soo had already realized that there were no human rights at the rehabilitation center. The guards at least treated them like cattle. The people inside the cell treated them even worse. The poor new guy, who was being treated like a dog, ended up getting kicked into the toilet. Lee Min-soo knew that, to survive, a person had to look strong, and if he could not look strong, he had to act like a dog. He had to look weak, cute, and completely harmless. At 8 o'clock, everyone went to the group shower. Each person had 3 minutes to shower, and could only use water and basic soap. The soap was also shared by around 50 people. It was disgusting. At 9 o'clock, the nightly head count was done to make sure everyone was inside their rooms. The poor new guy, instead of answering with his assigned number, barked and got hit in the head by the guard. It was not just one hit. He was hit several times, and even after all that, he kept making animal noises. After the final head count at 10 o'clock, the lights were turned off and the day ended. During the night, Lee Min-soo did not want to sleep. He was not tired. Meanwhile, the other new guy, the one with white hair, could barely even cry properly. They forced him to cry like an animal, but they did not stop him from crying. That was how Lee Min-soo spent his first night at the detention center. At 5:30 in the morning, they started cleaning their own cell, and everyone did it carefully. They organized everything, folded the sheets, and cleaned the floor. The morning started very early there. By 6 o'clock, breakfast was already being handed out. The food containers were passed through an opening underneath the door, and the portions were very small. During the meal, Lee Min-soo asked the others why they did not eat in the cafeteria. One of them answered that they only ate in the cafeteria after outdoor training. Lee Min-soo thought that at least inside the cell, they had been given plastic spoons, so he asked where the dog was and why he was not eating. The others answered that he was underneath, obviously. He was serving as a human table for them. Lee Min-soo simply told them to at least feed the boy while he was doing his job. The others replied that they cared about the dog like he was a friend, and that there was no reason to worry. Of course they were going to feed him. Then they took all the leftovers, threw them onto a plate, and gave them to him. He had to eat with his mouth, without any utensils. Lee Min-soo kicked the table and told them not to let him eat that. Then Lee Min-soo asked the dog if he was really just some brat, or if his name was Moon Hyun-jun, but the room leader explained to the killer that the place had its own rules and hierarchy. Since Lee Min-soo had arrived later, he had to follow the rules. If he did not like them, he would have to fight to become the leader, and to do that, he first had to beat the dog, since the dog had a slightly higher ranking. Lee Min-soo replied that this whole hierarchy game was ridiculous, but while he was trying to put an argument together, he was punched by Moon Hyun-jun himself, the dog of the cell. The others said that this was going to be fun to watch, but Lee Min-soo did not want to fight back. He could have, but how could he hit someone who was crying while being forced to hit him? He felt sorry for him. Meanwhile, at the orphanage, the director asked Kang Yusung if he was going to enlist the next day. She asked if he had already packed everything he needed. He answered that he had. The director packed his things and, at the end, picked up the stuffed penguin, which was a treasure to both him and his brother. She commented that the two brothers were the biggest troublemakers at the orphanage, especially Kang Yusung. He used to beat up the children like they were rats. Kang Yusung asked if he really did that. She asked if he did not remember. The children were so afraid that they would not even go near the orphanage. Kang Yusung replied that she had misunderstood. It was true that he fought with the children, but it was not exactly like that. Meanwhile, inside the cell, the other prisoners were making fun of the new guy, saying that he could not even defeat a dog, and that his parents had abandoned the miserable orphan. Then it was explained that the children were not afraid to go near the orphanage because of the place itself. They were afraid of Kang Yusung. In fact, Lee Min-soo was the most feared one. Kang Yusung was definitely better at beating people up, but Lee Min-soo was truly terrifying. He was crazy. After everything he had been through, whenever that bastard lost control, since he had nothing left to lose, he would fight like a wild beast. He would turn everyone into dogs. He beat the first one, who did not even have a chance to fight back. But, of course, everyone joined together and beat him back. The dog could never win. They told the killer kid to stop trying to act tough. That place was full of people like him who thought they were tough. They were not joking around. They were being nice to him because he was an abandoned orphan. But then Lee Min-soo shut one of them up using the mop that had been sitting in the toilet. He kept hitting him because the boy had insulted his mother. The others turned against him and said they were going to kill him. Lee Min-soo picked up the broken piece of the mop handle and asked if they had ever killed anyone before. At that moment, the congressman, who was Kang Yusung's father, was blowing off steam on the golf course. He said that the other candidate running against him had won because he had abolished the juvenile law. Meanwhile, the staff applauded and said that the congressman's swing had been great. But the congressman asked his son why he was standing there, bowing to him. Kang Yusung simply replied that he was thinking about enlisting in the military earlier. Dealing with his juvenile issues at that moment would be good for his father's political career. The congressman replied that Kang Yusung didn't need to pretend he cared about his own father's career. He was canceling his medical school acceptance because of this. Then he asked what his son had been doing, sneaking out at night, going to parties. He then asked if this was all because of his brother. The congressman took another swing and explained that even if his son and Song enlisted right then, there was no guarantee that he would be assigned to the juvenile rehabilitation center. Kang Yusung said that he knew that, which was why he was asking his father for help. The congressman asked why he should clean up the mess his brother had made. Kang Yusung thought that meant his father wasn't going to help him after all, but his father replied that he could help him, but it would be a trade. His son would have to help him become president. That way, he could arrange for him to go to the rehabilitation center. Meanwhile, Lee Min-soo was still fighting with that sharp piece of the handle, but he was eventually caught, beaten again, and restrained. At one point, he pretended to be dead, but then he took down both of them. Someone even got kicked in the balls, because everything was fair game in that fight. The one who seemed to be the leader of the room asked Lee Min-soo if his trigger was the word mother, or knowing that he had been abandoned. It was heartbreaking, because his mother must have been terribly disappointed to find out that the son she had abandoned had become a murderer. Lee Min-soo swung the sharp piece toward the long-haired guy's face, but the man stopped it at the last second. Lee Min-soo told him to apologize, unless he wanted to lose his eyes, but the long-haired guy asked what he was supposed to apologize for, saying that he had been abandoned, saying that he had no mother, or saying that he had committed a murder. There was nothing false about what he had said. Suddenly, the long-haired guy let go of the handle and said he hadn't done anything. He claimed that Lee Min-soo had started everything. Lee Min-soo himself hadn't noticed. noticed, but when he turned around, it was already too late. The guards had arrived in force to deal with the fight inside the cell. Lee Min-soo took all the blame and was completely beaten by the guards. The room leader explained that Lee Min-soo had used a weapon and attacked the other inmates, causing injuries in the process. He said that he would include every detail in the report. The guard ordered everyone to sit down. Then they dragged Lee Min-soo straight to solitary confinement, where he would spend 15 days. Solitary, also known as the punishment room, was where troublemakers were isolated for a certain period. Those days did not count toward their total detention time. Lee Min-soo thought he had just extended his own detention for no reason. At least being alone wasn't so bad. Maybe he should have caused trouble sooner, so he could have been sent there. The guard walked past the door and ordered him to sit up straight. If he lay down, another day would be added to his solitary confinement. In the punishment room, he had to stay on his knees until he fell asleep, under 24-hour supervision. Even his freedom to move his hands and feet was taken away. At least they loosened the restraints when he had to use the bathroom. But even then, there was no toilet paper. There was only an old faucet for him to clean himself with his own hands. Poor guy. They loosened the restraints for the bathroom, but when the next meal came, he had to eat with his face because they wouldn't untie the ropes. At 7 o'clock, they didn't loosen his restraints so he could write his essay either. So all he produced was a bunch of scribbles. Even in solitary, he still had to write that essay. But he didn't write anything. He only drew the people he needed to beat the hell out of. Everyone there had their own problems, but the biggest problem was that long-haired guy. Lee Min-soo needed to take him down no matter what. When he finally slept in solitary, Lee Min-soo remembered his childhood, the time when the house caught fire, and everything that had happened back then. He woke up and quickly returned to his knees. Maybe it was because of the environment. The bad memories kept coming back in his dreams. He was breathing heavily, gasping for air. If he fell asleep like that, he would have the same nightmare again. He just wanted to be able to sleep peacefully, so he stayed awake all night. After 16 days, Lee Min-soo left solitary confinement and returned to the Class A room. But he didn't come back happy. He came back furious and was greeted by fake smiles. The people there didn't want to beat him up. At least, not all of them. Then the leader kicked Lee Min-soo in the head and asked if he had been looking for him, Mama's boy. Of course it was a trap. Lee Min-soo was caught, tied up, had a cloth shoved into his mouth, and was thrown into the toilet so the bald guy could piss on him. But a guard appeared and ordered them to stop. The long-haired guy told the guard not to worry about it because they were doing everything with permission. The guard asked exactly whose permission they had and said he would deal with their punishment later. When the guard offered his hand to Lee Min-soo, he recognized him immediately. It was his brother, who had come there to take him home. It was Kang Yu-sung, disguised as a guard. Before all of that happened, Kang Yu-sung had also been forced to put up with his father singing karaoke at the military base. The congressman was singing a patriotic song, and even the colonel became emotional. According to him, he was a true patriot. The colonel told General Juk-si that the congressman represented the nation's desire for protection and had lived through the glorious days of the Korean army. But now, he just sat around in that office. The congressman told him to shut up, saying that he was still fighting for patriotism. Meanwhile, Kang Yu-sung was there, just listening to everything and having to put up with all that bullshit. He was there to enlist, just like all the other recruits. Everyone was a little nervous about having a congressman in the unit and said that he had come there for an important purpose. The atmosphere was kind of tense, and Kang Yu-sung wondered what kind of weird military song the colonel was singing. Then Juk-si asked his son if he was going to enlist right away and whether he was ready. Kang Yu-sung told his father that he was ready. He had already thought through every step needed to save his brother. He had questioned the right people, gathered information from other juvenile inmates, and confirmed the truth. The rehabilitation center was hell. That was why he had gone there, with determination. Even if it was only one day early, he would get his brother out of that hell. That was why he had disguised himself as a guard. He had a perfect plan, and if everyone followed the agreement, everything would work out. But at that moment, instead of Lee Min-soo taking his brother's hand, he turned around and punched the idiot who had been trying to piss on him in the face. The perfect plan Kang Yu-sung had prepared was ruined by his own brother right from the start. The inmates began trying to intimidate Kang Yu-sung, saying that he was too young to be a guard and might actually be a former inmate from the rehabilitation center. They also explained that they had their own rules inside. Kang Yu-sung asked if that rule was the rule of strength. It was about fighting, wasn't it? Then he would follow the rules that night, of course, without backing down. Meanwhile, Lee Min-soo was trying to fight the long-haired guy, who simply dodged every one of his punches. He said that swinging his arms around like that would never work. First, Lee Min-soo needed to learn how to keep his balance and stop yelling like a crazy person. But when he turned toward that guard, he realized that all the other inmates were already on the floor. Even the long-haired guy was a little scared by it, because he hadn't expected the guard to be that strong. During that moment of distraction, Lee Min-soo landed a flying kick right to the long-haired guy's chin. The leader said that he had been planning to let Lee Min-soo move on, but now he would make him his next dog. When the fight really started, Lee Min-soo didn't stand a chance. The guy was insanely strong and asked if he wanted to become his new puppy, his new dog. He needed to learn his place. Then he slammed Lee Min-soo's face down. Lee Min-soo still tried to fight back, but he was taken down without even getting a chance. Lee Min-soo was beaten up by the bastard who had insulted his mother, and he couldn't land a single hit. On top of that, every time he was punched, the face of his damn brother appeared in his head. Kang Yu-sung asked if Lee Min-soo was was still alive. He had gotten himself into a terrible situation, so Kang Yusung simply picked up his brother and carried him on his back like a bag of cement, while asking why he was so light. He shouldn't have been eating properly. The long-haired guy asked where he was taking Imin-su, saying that he needed to learn a lesson. Kang Yusung simply replied that he was taking his brother to solitary confinement. The long-haired guy asked if he wasn't going to fight him since he seemed to be good at fighting. Kang Yusung replied that he had spoken to someone outside, and that person had asked him to stop fighting. Once again, Lee Min-soo was thrown into solitary, but this time without the ropes that had tied his legs and arms. He remained unconscious for quite a while. At least he could use the bathroom, but he noticed that no water was coming out of the faucet. Then he found some toilet paper. Thank goodness, but he thought that solitary usually didn't have toilet paper, and that, on top of that, he wasn't tied up. That was when he remembered something. The guard outside was his brother. Lee Min-soo punched the door and asked what the hell he was doing there, calling him an idiot. Kang Yusung asked if he had at least washed his hands. Lee Min-soo said yes, and asked what he was doing there. Kang Yusung then asked if he thought he was some kind of hero. He had a good family and should live happily instead of going down with him. He needed to abandon a murderer like him because there was no reason to ruin his own life over it. If he stayed locked up there with him, he would eventually feel guilty. What a mess. But Kang Yusung replied that he really was an idiot. He asked if Lee Min-soo thought he hadn't killed anyone just because he was his brother, and then asked if he was crying on the floor. Lee Min-soo said he wasn't, calling him an idiot too. Then Lee Min-soo asked how he planned to get him out of there. Kang Yusung replied that as long as he didn't act like an idiot and keep ending up in solitary, he only needed to follow the program and listen to whatever he was told. But Lee Min-soo had one request. He wanted to fight that bastard long-haired guy one more time. Kang Yusung asked why he wanted to fight when he already knew he would lose. Lee Min-soo replied that the bastard had insulted his mother. He could take a lot of things, but he couldn't take an insult against her. Kang Yusung said that was fine. He could fight the guy, and he would even teach him how to really throw a punch. But if he lost again to the guy who had insulted their mother, Kang Yusung would kill him himself. There were 15 days left until the confinement ended, and the time in solitary was too short to build physical strength. So Lee Min-soo would learn specifically how to defeat Ga Se-jun, Ga Se-min's brother. After hearing the plan, Lee Min-soo asked if he really thought that would be enough to defeat Ga Se-jun. Kang Yusung replied that if his analysis was correct, his brother would win. If he lost, he would kill him himself. Then he asked if Lee Min-soo had memorized the tactics. Lee Min-soo said yes and asked his brother to trust him. Finally, Lee Min-soo returned to cell A. The other inmates asked if he had enjoyed his time in solitary and said that he should have come back tougher. Maybe it would be better to test that theory, but instead of turning everyone into little puppies, Lee Min-soo ended up becoming the cell's dog, taking on a submissive position. This was the first part of the plan, and he hated every second of it. He was putting up with it because he wanted to win. He needed to endure the enemy's attacks while waiting for the perfect opportunity. At that moment, they were playing a strategy game on his back. Lee Min-soo stood up and said that he couldn't take that shit anymore, but the others told him to put the table back and not to rebel. Even while staring at the bastard Ga Se-jun, Lee Min-soo held himself back. Kang Yusung's plan required him to do this, so he had to stay strong. For 5 days, he would take care of the cell. The rehabilitation center director controlled everything during class and had told Lee Min-soo not to fight until then. During that time, Kang Yusung would prepare the stage for him. So, reluctantly, Lee Min-soo returned to his position as the cell's dog. He would have to endure it for 5 days. On the second day, he was pretending to be a robot vacuum. Not just him, but the other cell dog too. Meanwhile, one of the inmates pretended to be a cat riding on top of the vacuum, going meow. On the third day, it was time for reflection, so Lee Min-soo and the other dog wrote all the essays they had to complete. Lee Min-soo even scolded Moon Hyun-jun, telling him to write that shit properly. On the fourth day, the two of them were pissing like dogs, and the whole thing was starting to get a little bizarre for everyone else. During meals, Moon Hyun-jun was always hesitant to eat the leftovers from the plate, but Lee Min-soo ate them happily. He was enduring everything because the 5th day was almost there. But after that meal of leftovers, Lee Min-soo threw up a lot. Moon Hyun-jun asked if he wasn't taking things too far. Lee Min-soo replied that he could handle it and that he was fine. Then Moon Hyun-jun gave Lee Min-soo a snack, saying that he looked weak, had an empty stomach, and was throwing everything back up. He asked Lee Min-soo not to tell anyone else because he had bought the cereal bar with his own allowance. Then he told Lee Min-soo to hang in there. During recreation time in the yard, they continued acting like dogs, catching frisbees with their mouths. The others commented that dog number 2 was much faster, while dog number 1 could barely catch the frisbee. The problem started when Moon Hyun-jun accidentally bumped into the kitchen staff and knocked some things over. He tried to apologize, but things weren't going to be that easy. Ga Se-jun was still thinking about that strange guard, wondering if he somehow knew about his sister and if she had been the one who sent him there. Then the kitchen staff came over kicking Moon Hyun-jun and asked Ga Se-jun if that was his dog. He had just made a huge mistake, and now they wanted to know if they were planning to declare war on the kitchen unit. If they apologized, they would let it go. The people from Cell A didn't want to let it go. Ga Se-jun, however, simply told them to forget about it. There was no reason to escalate the situation or make things more heated than necessary. The cook asked what that was supposed to mean and whether he wanted to handle the situation rationally. While talking, he kept kicking striking Moon Hyun-jun in the head. Lee Min-soo asked if the guards weren't going to intervene. One of the other inmates explained that the directors didn't care about small fights like that and let the inmates handle them themselves. Moon Hyun-jun kept asking for help. Lee Min-soo remembered what he had done for him, but he needed to keep the plan going, so he walked away. But then he came back and launched a frisbee straight into the cook's head. Dog number 2 asked if they hadn't come there because they had messed up outside and now wanted to continue causing trouble inside the facility. If that was the case, they would be treated like pigs. They had lost their pride, and their dignity was being trampled. Even so, Lee Min-soo helped Moon Hyun-jun, saying that no matter how bad the situation got, he should at least feel ashamed watching his own dog get beaten like that. Ga Si-jin ordered him not to interfere. One of the cooks then confronted the cell leader, but he took an elbow to the face. The long-haired guy said that was fine. He accepted the declaration of war, but before that, he wanted to settle things with dog number 2. At that moment, Lee Min-soo realized that he had messed up his brother's plan. A huge crowd was already gathering to watch the fight. Many people formed a circle around them, waiting for the confrontation. Ga Si-jin said that apparently the dog was asking to get beaten up. Lee Min-soo asked if he wanted to bet on who would win. Whoever won the fight would become the leader of the cell. This time, Lee Min-soo was confident that he could win. The rehabilitation center also had a classroom. The minors had to attend basic classes there, and during class, all authority belonged to the rehabilitation center director. Whatever happened depended entirely on him. The first stage of the plan Kang Yu-seong had created was for Lee Min-soo to become the leader of the cell by defeating Ga Si-jin. Kang Yu-seong had prepared the perfect environment for him to win. The stage was ready, and it was time for the actors to enter. But there was one problem. They weren't entering the classroom. They were late. Kang Yu-seong checked the clock and then looked out the window. That was when he saw his brother in the middle of a circle, throwing punches. Kang Yu-seong was furious and called his brother a fucking idiot. Of course, Lee Min-soo was ruining the plan and getting his ass kicked. In solitary, Lee Min-soo remembered Kang Yu-seong teaching him the moves he would have to use. First, a hook, then a liver punch, maybe an uppercut, followed by a middle kick, low kick, front kick, spinning kick, and finally, a straight punch. Lee Min-soo asked if he really had to remember something he had learned as a child. He had never actually trained. He had only been copying the movements, and that wouldn't be enough to defeat Ga Si-jin because he was strong. Kang Yu-seong admitted that Ga Si-jin fought well for someone who had never trained. His moves looked flashy, but they didn't have much flow. In fact, he didn't have a proper combination. In the end, he was just an ordinary guy who happened to fight well. Someone who was actually trained should never lose to him. Lee Min-soo, however, remembered that he had still lost. He couldn't land a single punch and had simply taken a beating. Even if he learned the moves his brother was showing him, he didn't think he could win. Kang Yu-seong explained that this was exactly why he was going to make Lee Min-soo fight in the classroom. If he kept dodging Ga Si-jin's attacks, he would eventually get trapped in a corner. The classroom had plenty of places where someone could get stuck, so he needed to use the environment to his advantage. Then he had to use the combination of moves Kang Yu-seong had taught him. Meanwhile, the people surrounding them wondered if this was a fight for the title of cell leader. Some said that the murderer didn't know how to fight. Lee Min-soo was actually bleeding and realized that the situation was terrible because there wasn't any wall there. Kang Yu-seong ran off to rescue his brother. That idiot never listened, not even when there was a plan. But there were too many people in the way. He couldn't see properly, much less intervene. He still tried to get the inmates to stop fighting. The rehabilitation center director was watching everything while eating popcorn. Kang Yu-seong then introduced himself as the new guard and said that he was going to stop the fight. The rehabilitation center director replied that there was no reason to interrupt it and asked if the new guard had ever watched a foreign wildlife documentary. He explained that those documentaries showed rats and other predators. Sometimes, a hungry snake would try to eat a rat, and the film crew wouldn't do anything. They simply let the rat get eaten. That was the natural law of things. To him, watching a fight had always been entertaining. Kang Yu-seong realized at that moment that the rehabilitation center director was completely crazy. The rehabilitation center director then said that they might as well enjoy the show. Lee Min-soo tried to use the combination of moves he had learned from his brother, but Ga Si-jin dodged and landed a straight punch right in his face. Lee Min-soo couldn't land a single hit and was just taking a beating. None of the moves he was following were working. Kang Yu-seong realized that even though his brother was following the steps, his reach was too short and his stamina was already running out. Lee Min-soo took a kick and was thrown into the barrier of people surrounding the fight. Kang Yu-seong thought his brother should just give up because it was already over. He would have to come up with another plan. But the wall of prisoners pushed Lee Min-soo back into the fight. He thought that if he kept going like this, he would lose just like last time. Then one of the prisoners pushed him back toward the fight and told him not to give up and to fight back. In reality, they were cheering for Lee Min-soo. Ga Si-jin asked what that mama's boy was looking for and if he was looking for his mother. Lee Min-soo laughed because he suddenly realized something. He remembered a funny situation and found a way to land the combination on Ga Si-jin again. The prisoners surrounding the circle began shouting both of their names. They wanted to see blood. Ga Si-jin was ready to finish finish the mama's boy off, and Lee Min-soo replied that he was too, because he was already planning to do exactly the same thing. He had finally figured out how to use the combination he had learned from his brother. The problem now was figuring out how to lure Ga Se-jin into the trap. Still in solitary, Lee Min-soo asked Kang Yu-sung how he was supposed to get Ga Se-jin into the corner and then beat him up. Ga Se-jin would never trap himself on purpose. Kang Yu-sung explained that he could provoke him and make him go toward the corner. Lee Min-soo said he understood, but he didn't know how to do that. Maybe the plan was useless after all. Kang Yu-sung replied that he would teach him a magic word that would definitely make Ga Se-jin furious. Lee Min-soo asked if he had known that all along and hadn't told him. He should have said it sooner. Kang Yu-sung explained that when Ga Se-jin heard that word, he would definitely lose his temper completely. So Lee Min-soo asked Ga Se-jin if, by any chance, his sister Ga Se-min was a total hottie. That was enough to provoke the long-haired guy. He punched Lee Min-soo so hard that he sent him flying into the wall of prisoners. The magic word had worked. Ga Se-jin was completely consumed by rage. Lee Min-soo fired back by asking if Mama's boy was the worst insult Ga Se-jin had. He blocked Ga Se-jin's punch, grabbed his hair, and threw him into the wall of prisoners. Finally, he managed to use the combination of moves he had learned. Ga Se-jin tried to move, but the wall of prisoners made it difficult for him. He was trapped in a corner, and Lee Min-soo started with a hook. Now the fight had really begun. Ga Se-jin had nowhere to dodge and needed to attack first, but once again his arm got partially trapped. At that moment, something caught Lee Min-soo's attention. Why was there an old man standing back there? Wasn't this a juvenile rehabilitation center? Before he could think about it too much, Ga Se-jin took a punch to the liver. His movements were completely limited by the wall of prisoners, and then he took another hook. On the third step, Lee Min-soo realized that his brother was using the wall of prisoners. The circle formed around the fight, just like the corners of the classroom they had planned to use. So he kept repeating the steps he had learned from Kang Yu-sung. Ga Se-jin still tried to fight back, but he took a low kick and then another hook. He couldn't do anything. He was simply getting beaten badly by Lee Min-soo. He was beaten until his face was swollen, and eventually he was knocked down. Lee Min-soo asked what he was doing and if he was just throwing punches randomly. He would never be able to hit him that way. Lee Min-soo had already warned him not to insult his mother. Then he kept punching Ga Se-jin. The people around them started wondering what was happening. Was Ga Se-jin actually losing? He couldn't land another hit. His vision began to blur, getting darker and darker until he finally collapsed. Lee Min-soo told him to apologize to his mother. Everyone wondered if Ga Se-jin had really lost and what that meant. After all, Lee Min-soo was now the leader of the cell. That was when the rehabilitation center director appeared. Everyone started making animal noises, and the rehabilitation center director couldn't hide his surprise that the boy had won. Just like in his wildlife documentary, it had been really interesting. The rat had managed to kill the snake. The rehabilitation center director asked if Lee Min-soo had been planning all of this since he arrived in the cell and commented that he seemed to have gotten pretty excited during the fight. Lee Min-soo, however, only responded with animal noises. Guard Kang Yu-sung took Ga Se-jin to solitary confinement. As he passed his brother, he asked who he had picked up to be so disobedient. Lee Min-soo replied that, of course, it had been his own brother. Kang Yu-sung thought that things hadn't gone exactly the way he wanted, but phase 1 of the plan was complete. Now phase 2 would begin. Later, Kang Yu-sung informed Ga Se-min that her brother had been sent to solitary. She was drawing something, and Kang Yu-sung explained that this wasn't part of the plan, but it had ended up happening. Ga Se-min asked him to at least stop moving because he was ruining her drawing. Kang Yu-sung was posing almost naked for her, wearing only underwear, and asked how long he had to stay in that position, because it was really difficult. Ga Se-min said he could move into another position, completely naked, and told him to stop complaining. She was already finished. The problem was that the drawing looked terrible. Ga Se-min was really bad at drawing, and Kang Yu-sung was pissed that he had stood still all that time for something like that. Ga Se-min said it was the model's fault, and also explained that he didn't need to apologize for her brother. He had been sent to solitary because he deserved it. Then she told Kang Yu-sung that he and his brother were probably in danger now, because Lee Min-soo had messed with the kitchen crew. Ga Se-min was part of the cooking group at the female rehabilitation center, and sometimes they needed to contact the staff at the male center. It might look like an ordinary job, but nobody messed with the kitchen crew. Among them, there was someone who needed special attention. The leader of the kitchen group, Jang Dubo. When it was time to serve Lee Min-soo's food, Jang Dubo put a slightly larger portion on his plate. Ga Se-min explained that he might look a little stupid and even harmless, but he always took care of the food and had already killed 2 guards in total. Then Jang Dubo warned Lee Min-soo that he would regret messing with the kitchen crew. At the moment when he was confronted by the head of the culinary team, Lee Min-soo asked what he meant. Him? He hadn't done anything, so he said that he wasn't that Lee Min-soo and that the leader must have gotten him confused with someone else, since the name was pretty common. The leader then apologized for the mistake, and Lee Min-soo ran away while the others told the leader that it really was him. But by the time they realized what had happened, Lee Min-soo had already escaped. Meanwhile, the press was all over the meeting that South Korea's president Han Man-soo had organized with representatives from every political party, including the lawmakers. Of course, he welcomed everyone warmly, shaking their hands with a smile on his face, and that included Juk Si, who had lost the presidential election to him. Han Man-soo said that the two of them had been opponents during the campaign, but now they were doing everything they could for the good of the country. The problem was that Juxi couldn't stand the guy. To make things worse, Han Monsu even slapped him on the butt. Juxi wondered what the hell was wrong with that crazy man. He had literally just been slapped on the butt. Since he couldn't take his anger out on the president, he let it out by throwing a bunch of punches at a punching bag because, obviously, he would never hit the president. However, he ended up being distracted by his son's overly detailed presentation about the youth rehabilitation center he was investigating. Kang Yusung told his father that taking down President Han Monsu would be much easier than he had imagined. All they had to do was destroy his political foundation, which was exactly that youth rehabilitation center. Juxi replied that this was precisely why he had put his son there, and asked if he had made any progress. Kang Yusung said yes, and explained that he had seen many things inside that center, things the public definitely wouldn't want to know about. The children were forced to be violent toward one another, while the guards and the director abused them in different ways. The inmates themselves deliberately fought each other, and the staff did nothing to stop them. In fact, they used it as entertainment. The place was practically hell. Juxi thought that was incredible, and realized that this could be the president's weak point. They could use all of it to bring him down. Even so, he explained that it wouldn't be enough by itself. Juvenile offenders were still criminals, so there was no way to guarantee that public opinion would side with them instead of the actual victims. Besides, Han Monsu had promised a bright future, since he planned to make human rights one of the priorities of his administration. In other words, he could eventually be forgiven for everything that had happened there. That was why Kang Yusung would need to dig much deeper and find something that could truly bring him down. That was why Kang Yusung went back to working as a guard. He was there, ordering all the prisoners to get into the Siri position alongside the director of the rehabilitation center. The director even commented that it would be a good idea to play the Siri game that night, and one of the people imitating a Siri was of course Lee Min-soo. He couldn't take that hell anymore and had reached his limit. When his brother came closer, he tried to say the word human, but all he managed to make was the sound of a Siri. Since Siri doesn't actually make a sound, they were simply imitating the name Siri, just like a Pokemon. So, Kang Yusung took Lee Min-soo to a slightly more private place. Lee Min-soo thought he was finally going to be released from the exercise, but no, he simply had to start imitating a lobster instead of a Siri. Kang Yusung apologized and explained that it would look very suspicious if he simply pulled his brother out of the activity. Now that they could talk quietly, Kang Yusung told him that they were moving on to the second phase of the plan. The Youth Rehabilitation Center operated with a point system for both rewards and punishments. When an inmate reached 100 positive points, he received a reward and could also have his case reviewed, possibly reducing his sentence. However, if he collected 100 negative points, his stay at the center would be extended. At that moment, Lee Min-soo had negative 50 points after a major fight and 2 trips to solitary confinement. He couldn't afford to make another mistake. The easiest way to earn points at that moment was to volunteer for the cooking team. The problem was that he had already gotten into trouble with the kitchen staff. Lee Min-soo then said that he would die if he went there. Even so, he kept imitating a lobster whenever a guard walked by. As soon as the guard left, he went back to complaining that he couldn't join the cooking team because he would die in there. Kang Yusung replied that he would try to come up with another plan for him. Later, Lee Min-soo was relaxing peacefully, listening to the birds and feeling the light breeze coming through the window as the sun began to set. This was happening because, as the new leader of the cell, he was making all the other inmates do the cleaning for him. That was the job his brother had managed to get for him. But when the guards sent him to the next location, Lee Min-soo discovered that he had to clean the kitchen, exactly where the cooking team worked. As soon as he arrived, he was confronted by the leader again. Jang Dubo was already ready to turn Lee Min-soo into the next meal. Even though he was a delinquent, Jang Dubo trained to become one of the best chefs in Korea. His right hand was trained to lift a 3-kilogram frying pan and fry food, while his other hand was trained for more delicate tasks. To him, criticizing his cooking was practically a deadly insult. Even so, he couldn't do much because there was no way his talent could be recognized in that place, surrounded by a bunch of idiots and delinquents. Everyone else who cooked with him was so terrible that they looked like they were torturing the food. Jang Dubo felt sad watching the ingredients being wasted like that. He honestly wanted to tear all those crazy people in half, but he couldn't because they were part of his cooking team. Lee Min-soo, however, was different. He wasn't part of the group. Because of that, Jang Dubo even thought about smashing a frying pan over his head to teach him a lesson. But before he could do that, he discovered that Lee Min-soo was actually damn good at cooking. So Jang Dubo picked Lee Min-soo up in his arms and asked where he had learned to cook. Lee Min-soo replied that he had learned at the orphanage, obviously. Then he asked why Jang Dubo was crying. Jang Dubo answered that he had finally found a decent cook in that kitchen. To him, Lee Min-soo was his treasure. Meanwhile, the kitchen staff were secretly eating supplies from the storage room, even though they knew they weren't allowed to do that. They were also discussing how they could make Jang Dubo and Lee Min-soo get into a fight, since that was their mission. The problem was that Jang Dubo seemed to have actually taken a liking to Lee Min-soo. That was when Kang Yusung showed up in the storage room and asked what those guys were doing there. He had noticed that some of the kitchen supplies had been disappearing recently. The kitchen staff tried to intimidate him, saying that the place was their territory, but they ended up getting beaten up instead. Kang Yusung then commented that, with that, he had gotten rid of another threat standing in his brother's way. Lee Min-soo himself kept saying that he didn't want to be part of the cooking team, which worried Kang Yusung. Yu-sung. Apparently though, he was adapting really well, so Kang Yu-sung started wondering who had put Lee Min-soo on that team, since it hadn't been him. In fact, it had been the director of the Youth Rehabilitation Center himself, who had been waiting for a massive fight between the two of them. He ended up disappointed when he realized that wasn't going to happen. Shortly after that, the guards went to tell the director that his favorite food was being served, an omelet with rice. The food looked so beautiful, well made, and delicious that even the director thought it tasted great and stopped complaining. After some time, Jang Dubo was extremely excited. The big day had finally arrived, the special day that happened only once a month. First, they had to clean the kitchen using a new bar of soap, since they normally used an old one that was completely worn out. But Jang Dubo went much further than that. He prepared his own soap recipe, grating the product first, and then putting everything in a double boiler. After that, he added a few ingredients, such as tangerine juice, to give it a better smell, and add even more vitamins. When he finally finished the product, Lee Min-soo asked what it was supposed to be used for. Was it for cleaning the kitchen, or eating? He simply couldn't understand anything anymore. Jang Dubo explained that no, it was meant to be used on their hair. They had to look their absolute best. It was a special hair gel, so everyone on the cooking team started putting the product in their hair and combing it perfectly. They were getting ready for the most important day of the month, which was the day when the new ingredients arrived. However, they weren't really getting that dressed up because of the ingredients. They were doing it because the people delivering everything were the girls from the Women's Rehabilitation Center. Of course, the boys needed to look their absolute best for that moment. It was their chance to show off their manly strength by carrying the boxes for the girls and impressing them with their muscles, kindness, and good looks. For some reason though, Lee Min-soo was the target of all the girls' attention, exactly because he was small and cute. Honestly, he was clearly the best looking guy there, but that was probably just because he was the main character, right? And that immediately made Jung Dubo furious. Then, suddenly, one of the girls approached while carrying a love letter. Of course, Jung Dubo assumed the letter was for him. Right away, he started imagining his marriage to that girl, their future family, their children, and even the names he would give them. But the love letter was actually for the leader of Group A. That did not make Jung Dubo happy at all. Manly tears rolled down his manly, muscular face. So Jang Dubo went looking for whoever the leader of Group A was, and discovered that it was none other than Lee Min-soo. Thinking about his future, and the fact that this guy was stealing his future wife, Jang Dubo started a fight right in the middle of the kitchen. Lee Min-soo simply asked why this was suddenly happening, and managed to dodge Jang Dubo's punch, which hit a metal structure and completely bent it. Jang Dubo then said that Lee Min-soo should just die already, because he was the enemy of his future family. Lee Min-soo responded with a flying kick, asking what family that idiot was even talking about. But Jang Dubo kept saying that he was in love with that girl, and that in some hypothetical future, she would also be in love with him. In other words, in his head, Lee Min-soo had stolen his future wife, hypothetically speaking. As he dodged the attacks, Lee Min-soo realized that he actually wanted this fight. After all, that bastard couldn't go 10 minutes without getting himself into some kind of trouble either. But after taking another punch to the face, he realized he wouldn't even be able to get close to Jung Dubo, since the guy's arms were way too long. The punch he had just taken was practically like getting hit in the head with a rock. Jung Dubo continued taking revenge for the moments he imagined he would someday spend with the girl who had delivered the love letter, even though the letter wasn't even meant for him. Meanwhile, Lee Min-soo ended up completely cornered in the kitchen. That's when he remembered that he knew the perfect fighting style for dealing with someone while trapped in a corner. Lee Min-soo deliberately took a hit and used a frying pan to block the attack. Then, he tried to provoke Jung Dabo, saying that not even a girl would go out with him. After that, he tried to throw him against the corner so he could beat him up, exactly like he had done with Ga Sejun. But Jung Dabo was extremely heavy and simply didn't move, so he smashed Lee Min-soo's face and tried to finish him for good. Lee Min-soo, however, managed to fight back by using a bag of flour. Meanwhile, the other girls who still had to deliver the rest of the ingredients were arguing among themselves about who would carry the next boxes. They were all afraid of Jang Dabo, and nobody wanted to go near him, until one girl volunteered because she didn't think Jang Dabo was that ugly. In fact, she actually thought he was handsome. Meanwhile, Jang Dabo looked like the devil himself, chasing Lee Min-soo around the kitchen and trying to crush him. But Lee Min-soo was much faster, so Jang Dubo eventually got tired in the middle of the chase. Just when he thought the chase was finally over, Lee Min-soo smashed an egg over his head and took the opportunity to tease him. The two of them kept fighting for quite a while, simply throwing kitchen utensils and food at each other. Then, just as Jang Dubo threw a frying pan filled with hot oil, the girl opened the door. As the heroic protagonist he was, Lee Min-soo had no choice but to protect her, and ended up taking all the hot oil across his back. Of course, when Kang Yu-sung heard what had happened, he ran straight to the infirmary. He didn't want his brother to end up like Ga Semin, with that terrible burn on his head. But when he reached his brother's bed, he found nothing but a skeleton. Even the skeleton of Lee Min-soo said that. Unfortunately, he had ended ended up that way. Of course, it was just Lee Min-soo messing with him. Kang Yu-sung got angry, walked over to him, and told him not to joke about something like that. Afterward, the two brothers shared a very emotional hug while Kang Yu-sung said that, at least, his brother was okay. Lee Min-soo apologized for worrying him and said that he hadn't wanted any of that to happen. Even the nurse showed up and told the two of them to stop playing around with the skeleton in the room. After that, Kang Yu-sung asked if Lee Min-soo wanted to stay in the kitchen. Lee Min-soo said yes because it was the fastest way to earn points, and he had no intention of wasting that opportunity. On top of that, Lee Min-soo asked if Kang Yu-sung could teach him how to defeat Jang Dubo. His brother said that he could, but warned him that Lee Min-soo would have to be prepared. Later, the director of the Youth Rehabilitation Center became a little curious about the new training Kang Yu-sung had prepared. The guard explained that the exercise was only meant to punish the children and make them understand their place. The training was called the dung beetle, but instead of using actual dung, they used round rocks. Everyone was participating, not just Lee Min-soo, staying in a position similar to a plank, with the lower half of their bodies raised and resting on the rocks. Lee Min-soo started thinking that his brother could simply teach him how to fight normally. Meanwhile, the director of the Youth Rehabilitation Center congratulated the guard on his creativity and his evil abilities. Congratulations, apparently. Lee Min-soo then asked his brother whether that training would really help him defeat Jang Dubo. Kang Yu-sung answered that it wouldn't be enough by itself. Lee Min-soo told his brother to go to hell again and continued rolling the rock around in that ridiculous position. Kang Yu-sung explained that his brother was actually doing very well. So, Lee Min-soo asked once again if that meant he would be able to defeat Jang Dubo. Kang Yu-sung once again answered that he wouldn't. There was still another training exercise. Lee Min-soo then suffered through the rock exercise again. At that point, it was impossible to tell whether Kang Yu-sung was actually training his brother or simply punishing him. Honestly, if he had been Lee Min-soo's older brother, he probably would have done the same thing, just to mess with him. Kang Yu-sung explained that defeating someone much heavier than him wouldn't be easy at all. However, if Lee Min-soo could make it through the third phase of the training, he would have a chance of winning. The third step was moving a gigantic rock that looked more like one of those pillars used in a building structure. Meanwhile, Ga Se-jin had already been in solitary confinement for a week. He still couldn't understand how he had lost to Lee Min-soo. Maybe he had let his guard down, but he promised himself that he would win next time. He was thinking about all of that while squatting over the hole in his cell to take a dump, but he still didn't have any toilet paper. He was already sick of that solitary cell, and, with no other option, he even tore off part of his shirt sleeve to wipe himself. But Kang Yu-sung appeared and handed him some paper, mentioning that, by the way, the two of them still had some things to talk about. Just the two of them. As soon as Kang Yu-sung entered the cell, Ga Se-jin tried to take advantage of the opportunity to attack him, demanding to know how he knew his sister. Once again though, Kang Yu-sung restrained him with ease. Instead of beating him up, however, he said that if Ga Se-jin was so curious about his sister, he could talk to her directly. At that moment, he was already on a phone call with Ga Se-min. As soon as she had the chance, after confirming that he really was her brother and saying a few affectionate things, Ga Se-min asked Kang Yu-sung to cover his ears because she didn't want him to hear what came next. Then, she started absolutely destroying her own brother with every kind of curse, insult, and complaint about him being a complete piece of crap. In fact, she screamed so much that Kang Yu-sung could still hear her even with his ears covered. Ga Se-jin was completely stunned. Those were the first words he had heard from his sister in so long, and basically all she was saying was that he had instant noodles where his brain should have been, while also calling him an asshole, bastard, idiot, and retard. Meanwhile, Lee Min-soo was still trying to move that gigantic construction pillar, which hadn't moved even half an inch. The rest of the Class A inmates were discussing dinner and telling Lee Min-soo to give up already. They knew he was doing that training because he wanted to beat Jang Dubo in a fight, but none of them believed it was possible. Among all the inmates at the rehabilitation center, Jang Dubo was definitely one of the strongest. They said that Jo Chang-soo had only ended up in that condition after taking a punch from Jang Dubo's right-hand man. Maybe Lee Min-soo would end up the same way and get kicked out of the rehabilitation center. In the end, maybe that would even be better for him. While Lee Min-soo was nearly dying from all the physical training, Ga Se-jun was nearly dying from listening to his sister insult him, while Kang Yu-sung was also hearing everything despite having his ears covered. Eventually, Ga Se-jun simply ended the call. Meanwhile, Ga Se-min was at a plastic surgery center when a nurse came in to say that the doctor, who had also heard the entire conversation, wanted to speak with her. Kang Yu-sung asked if the call had ended and realized that Ga Se-jun was starting to understand that he was on his sister's side too. After all, Kang Yu-sung was Lee Min-soo's older brother, so it made sense that he was the one who had taught the boy how to fight. Because of that, Ga Se-jin asked him to teach him how to fight as well. Meanwhile, the kitchen crew was feeling a little down because Jang Dubo had gone completely crazy after what happened with Lee Min-soo. He really wanted revenge, but the boy had disappeared. However, just to liven things up, Lee Min-soo came back, and of course, Jang Dubo immediately charged at him like a bull, ready to kill him. He was no longer looking depressed. Now, he was completely consumed by rage. Lee Min-soo had barely arrived when he started provoking Jang Dubo, saying that the reason girls did not like him was simply because he was painfully ugly. The kitchen crew immediately realized what that meant. The boy was going to die. They were already thinking about having to bury another body. body. Jang Dubo charged at Lee Min-soo as if everything that had ever gone wrong in his life was that boy's fault. But once again, Lee Min-soo used the strategy of running around the counter and making Jang Dubo wear himself out. Finally, Jang Dubo decided to climb onto the counter to reach him, but Lee Min-soo defended himself with one of the metal cabinet doors. Jang Dubo's attack completely dented the metal, but even with his hand stuck, he managed to punch Lee Min-soo in the face with his other fist. This time, he did not fall for the same trick, so Lee Min-soo decided to use a different tactic, taking advantage of Jang Dubo's own weight and using it against him. Meanwhile, the director of the rehabilitation center was serving himself like a true king. Kang Yu-sung had made sure to prepare a great meal, create a pleasant atmosphere, set aside a special drink for him, and even prepare a dinner show. While eating, the director of the rehabilitation center watched the fight between Lee Min-soo and Jang Dubo. Jang Dubo commented that it was nice to finally see the boy stop running because now he was going to be executed, but Lee Min-soo started using Jang Dubo's own arms against him. After all, the bigger and more muscular a person is, the stiffer their body also tends to be. Lee Min-soo would never be able to beat Jang Dubo with brute strength, so he stayed very close to him, taking advantage of his opponent's own strength and even using headbutts to deal damage. That was when he remembered the training his brother had given him. Lee Min-soo asked if he could not simply throw Jang Dubo into a corner, just like he had done with Ga Sejin. Kang Yu-sung explained that the difference in size between Lee Min-soo and Ga Sejin was not that big, but compared to the difference between Lee Min-soo and Jang Dubo, the situation was completely different. Jang Dubo was much bigger and much heavier. Because of that, Lee Min-soo would have to pray that he did not end up trapped in a corner and beaten to death. To help his brother, Kang Yu-sung decided to ask a scientific question. He asked how Lee Min-soo was able to move those two rocks even though they were much lighter than him. The answer was simple. He was using the principle of leverage. In fact, every part of the human body also worked based on that same principle. So, if Lee Min-soo could use leverage to move those rocks, he could do the same thing against the human wall that was Jang Dubo. While Lee Min-soo finally managed to land a punch, Kang Yu-sung asked the director of the rehabilitation center if everything was to his liking. The director replied that it was very good, but also too predictable. Jang Dubo did not even seem to feel any pain. His expression remained exactly the same, and there was no way that small boy could defeat him. On top of that, Lee Min-soo was already getting exhausted from hitting him so much. That was when Kang Yu-sung suggested a bet. He would bet on the smaller fighter, Lee Min-soo. The director of the rehabilitation center replied that he loved a good bet. Kang Yu-sung realized that this would also be a great opportunity to test his theory. All martial arts had a neutral stance that focused on protecting the face. There was a reason for that. The head was extremely vulnerable. Some areas were even more dangerous to hit, especially the jaw. That was exactly where Jang Dubo took a clean punch. The blow was critical and left Jang Dubo completely dizzy. He could no longer fight back, lost his balance, and ended up taking another brutal punch that crushed his face. At that moment, he started imagining his future disappearing right before his eyes, along with the girl who would become his wife and the children he would have with her. Then, he collapsed to the floor, feeling like he had lost everything. Of course, both the kitchen crew and the director of the rehabilitation center were completely shocked by Jang Dubo's defeat. The director even asked Kang Yu-sung how he knew the boy would win. Kang Yu-sung replied that it had only been a guess, nothing more. The director accepted the answer and said it was fine, since the bet had been fair. Now, the guard could think about what he wanted as his reward. That was when Lee Min-soo finally discovered the reason behind all that trouble. The love letter was meant for the leader of Class A, but nobody knew that Lee Min-soo had become the new leader. The girl had given him the letter because she thought Ga Sejin was still holding the position, so Lee Min-soo started thinking about everything he had gone through to defeat Jang Dubo, all because of a simple misunderstanding involving that letter. He almost tried to hit the unconscious man, but the kitchen crew stopped the fight. After all, there were limits. Hitting someone while they were unconscious was against the rules. Meanwhile, in a restricted area even inside the rehabilitation center, the veterans were choosing the next candidate for the bets. Now that Ga Sejin and Jang Dubo were out of the game, they started questioning whether this Lee Min-soo was really as powerful as everyone said. But first, they went over the candidates who were still in the game. One of them was the leader of a gang in the construction area of the rehabilitation center, a Class A named Lee Kang-min, the construction supervisor. The other was Ha Sun-chul, a member of the maintenance team. Some of them discussed the candidates who were still left, completely ignoring Lee Min-soo's presence. They were excited to hear the opinion of the most powerful man in the center, the one who held the top 1 position, and Im Ji-soo put his money on Lee Min-soo as the next candidate in the betting game. After the last fight, Jang Dubo was sent to solitary confinement. Lee Min-soo, on the other hand, managed to recover a little, mainly because he was earning points by working in the kitchen, but in exchange, he had to take over as the leader. What a great reward, huh? Now he basically had to cook all the hardest dishes and command all those idiots. They did not even know that only a small amount of rice was supposed to go into the rice cooker. They played around with the ingredients, burned food, and somehow even managed to burn water. Lee Min-soo was already hoping Jang Dubo would come back soon, but when it was time to receive ingredients from the girls, those guys suddenly became completely different people. All of a sudden, they acted polite, honorable, and powerful. Lee Min-soo did not get left behind either, because the girl he had saved earlier came over to thank him and handed him a love letter. there. At first, Lee Min-soo thought it was meant for Ga Se-jin again, but she made it very clear that the letter was for him. You idiot. And sure enough, the letter started with a confession that made Lee Min-soo turn as red as a pepper. He had not expected that at all. At that moment, he even started imagining what his life would be like by her side, exactly like Jang Dubo had done. In the letter, she explained that right after being saved by Lee Min-soo, she had been very grateful, but she also revealed that she already knew him before that. The first time she saw Lee Min-soo was when he threw the frisbee to help his cellmate. She had fallen for those crazy, almost sadistic-looking eyes of his and had been completely impressed, and to give him that letter, she had prepared herself quite a bit that day. She had straightened her hair with an improvised flat iron made from one of those salad tongs heated over the fire, and she had even found some improvised ingredients to use as makeup. In the end, she looked beautiful. Then, she asked Lee Min-soo to answer the love letter the next time they met. When he returned to his cell and finished reading it, the Class A members immediately started calling him a traitor. After all, he had already gotten himself a girlfriend before they did, and that was practically grounds for the death penalty. Lee Min-soo replied that he really was happy about the letter, but the others noticed that he still seemed a little unmotivated. After all, they only received letters from their relatives, and even that was rare. So, he said they could read the letter too if they wanted. It was a letter signed by Sarah. While things were going well for one of the brothers, the other, Kang Yu-sung, was first congratulated by the director of the rehabilitation center. He said that Kang Yu-sung had done a great job over the last 3 months. However, the director had also looked through some things on the security cameras and noticed that Kang Yu-sung seemed pretty close to Lee Min-soo. Because of that, he asked what kind of relationship the two had. Meanwhile, in the shower, Lee Min-soo was wondering how he could look handsome and smell good for Sarah the next time they met. The problem was that the center's soap was already terrible, and to make things worse, it had gotten even smaller, if that was even possible. Then, out of nowhere, one of the guys handed him some shampoo. Lee Min-soo was surprised and asked how the hell he had managed to get it. The person who had given him the shampoo was none other than Im Ji-soo, the top one in the center, who, by the way, had amazing hair. Of course, Kang Yu-sung's brain immediately started working in ways it had never worked before to get himself out of that situation with the director. But the director of the rehabilitation center was not thinking that they were brothers or anything like that. He simply said that the two seemed like a master and student because he had noticed that Kang Yu-sung was teaching Lee Min-soo how to fight. He even found it interesting, but warned him not to get too close to that piece of trash. Kang Yu-sung was relieved and replied by obeying the director. After that, he left to prepare another activity in the yard. But when he was alone in his office, the director of the rehabilitation center sent a message to another guard, ordering him to investigate Kang Yu-sung's entire life. In fact, he found the whole situation quite interesting, and that was exactly why he had not tried to stop the two from getting closer. Meanwhile, Ga Se-jin was still remembering all the insults he had received from his own sister. At least he could be happy because she had managed to get out of the rehabilitation center. But at the same time, he could hear Jung Dubo screaming and crying, saying that life was unfair and that everything was Lee Min-soo's fault. So, Kang Yu-sung opened the door and explained that it had not been Lee Min-soo's fault. With his eyes completely swollen, Jung Dubo replied that it absolutely had been. According to him, Lee Min-soo had stolen his wife and ruined his life. But Kang Yu-sung explained very clearly that the letter had not been for Lee Min-soo. It had been for Ga Se-jun, who was the leader of Class A at the time. Immediately, Jung Dubo completely changed the focus of his anger and forgave Lee Min-soo. But Kang Yu-sung showed him something else. A picture of Ga Se-jun standing next to Ga Se-min, the great master of cooking in the rehabilitation centers. Jung Dubo admired Ga Se-min a lot and started wondering why Ga Se-jun was standing next to her. In his mind, that bastard had to die. But Kang Yu-sung revealed that the two were siblings. From that moment on, Jung Dubo started calling Ga Se-jun his brother-in-law. When he heard that, Ga Se-jun asked why that damn pig was calling him brother-in-law, and who the hell he thought he was. At least Kang Yu-sung had managed to shift his brother's anger towards something else, and even took the opportunity to create a friendship between Ga Se-jun and Jung Dubo. Now, his brother only needed to earn points. Simple as that. Kang Yu-sung continued with his investigation, because that was his job. He had only been able to remain in the rehabilitation center and help Lee Min-soo because Juk-si, his father and a congressman, wanted to put an end to the president's plans. Because of that, Kang Yu-sung kept investigating and discovered that there was a restricted area where some people came out after being tortured, completely beaten up and in terrible condition. There were also other prisoners going through the rehabilitation process, but they wore red uniforms, and the person who had given Lee Min-soo the shampoo was actually one of those people. Later, while they were talking among themselves, Ga Se-jun asked if Jung Dubo had also lost to Lee Min-soo. Ga Se-jun admitted that he had lost, but only because he let his guard down. Jang Dubo said the same thing had happened to him. In fact, he had been caught in a trap. The two of them then realized that this situation would probably attract a lot of attention to Lee Min-soo, not only from the guards and rehabilitation staff, but also from the other prisoners, the so-called big fish. They might even put Lee Min-soo in as a candidate instead of them. But Ga Se-jun said that was impossible. To him, Lee Min-soo would be the candidate who reached the top, and he planned to pay him back for the humiliation he had suffered, no matter what. After that, Im Ji-soo introduced himself and, to Lee Min-soo's surprise, was actually very affectionate toward him. He even patted Lee Min-soo on the head, saying that he was so small that he could not understand how he had defeated Jung Dubo. Lee Min-soo replied that he was not small, he was just still growing. Then, Im Ji-soo explained that this time, he had been the one to come looking for Lee Min-soo, but next time, it would be the other way around. It would not be easy, but he would be waiting for it. Of course, Lee Min-soo did not understand a single thing. When he returned to the kitchen, he only asked who the bastard was that had put a fish head in the ramen. The cook responsible for it admitted that he had screwed up, but Lee Min-soo simply started eating the dish anyway. It was no big deal. Then, all of a sudden, everyone stopped talking because Jang Dubo was back. Everyone thought he would crush Lee Min-soo as soon as he saw him, but to everyone's surprise, Jang Dubo bowed and apologized for the misunderstanding, and he did not do it just once. He kept apologizing over and over again. Lee Min-soo said he would only forgive Jang Dubo if they ate that ramen together. The others said nobody was angry anymore, and that there was no reason for them to keep fighting. In fact, they even took the opportunity to mention that Lee Min-soo had received another love letter, but Jang Dubo got pissed off again and started chasing him, saying that Lee Min-soo had stolen his second wife. This time though, Lee Min-soo was happy because that was the day he would finally return the letter to Sarah, but then he discovered that Class A, which was his class, would have to take part in some volunteer work, except there was nothing voluntary about it, because Lee Min-soo definitely did not want to go. And the worst part was that this was exactly the day he was supposed to give the letter to Sarah. To make things worse, the other group of prisoners going with them was apparently led by a rich guy who had influence on the outside. He wanted the others to become his subordinates too, but the people from Class A did not like that idea at all. The group was made up of a bunch of suck-ups who started asking if Lee Min-soo had really been the one to defeat Ga Sejun and Jung Dobo. After all, with that size, he looked like a complete weakling. Then, a guard showed up to restore order, but it was obvious that he was on the other group's side. When the Class A members complained, they were the ones who ended up getting beaten. Lee Min-soo realized a little too late that the guards were protecting those guys, until Kang Yusung showed up to actually put things in order. The other guard did not want to cause trouble with him. Kang Yusung then asked if Wang Hyuk was okay to keep working, and he answered that he could still continue. After that, Kang Yusung also asked Lee Min-soo if he had not been about to attack a guard a little earlier. Lee Min-soo replied that of course he had not, and that his brother could trust him. But when they reached the bus, he was already almost starting another fight with a different group. This time though, there was a reason, because those guys were simply unbearable. They kept provoking the Class A members with their stinky feet and arrogant laughter. The leader of the other group even said that if they had a problem, they could fight his group. According to him, even if Ga Sejun showed up, they would not stand a chance. Ironically, Ga Sejun himself got on the bus at that exact moment. After all, that was the day he was getting out of solitary confinement. As soon as he entered, he ordered everyone to put their feet down, and then sat right next to Lee Min-soo. The volunteer work would take place at a rest home for the elderly. The prisoners and guards were welcomed very warmly by the staff. They even got a cup of soda with a taste of capitalism. At first, they thought it would be a pretty boring job, because they would basically have to take care of a bunch of grandpas and grandmas. But one of the Class A guys spotted a young woman and assumed she had to be a nurse. The moment Ga Sejun looked at her, he realized she was his sister. He even spit out his entire soda, completely shocked, wondering why she was there. Later, the prisoners started taking care of the elderly, and surprisingly, they were doing a really good job. But at some point, that same guy started making fun of Lee Min-soo again. He pretended to be an old man just to force Lee Min-soo to wash his feet. Lee Min-soo was furious and was already ready to beat the hell out of him, but the guard who was working with the other group showed up and started recording the whole situation so he could report him. Because of that, Lee Min-soo kept himself under control and did not cause any trouble. Meanwhile, Ga Semin was walking with an elderly woman, pushing her wheelchair through the yard. When they passed by Ga Sejun, she took the opportunity to stop for a moment and talk to him. Ga Semin asked if Ga Sejun was there, and started commenting on how many of his friends were working at the place. He replied by asking whether Ga Semin had really gone to that nursing home after everything she had been through, especially after what that old man had done to her. Ga Semin admitted that she deeply regretted it. She should have reported the man for harassment and simply moved on with her life. But after everything that happened, the two of them ended up in rehabilitation. Even so, she explained that not every elderly person was disgusting. Then, she asked whether Ga Sejun, when he got old, would also end up becoming disgusting like that. She ended the conversation without getting an answer, and continued walking with the elderly woman she was taking care of. Later, it was time for the meal. Of course, the prisoners had also helped prepare and serve the food. While Lee Min-soo was feeding the elderly man he had been assigned to help, he saw that same damn kid eating food that belonged to an elderly woman. The people from the group took the opportunity to make fun of him again. This time, however, instead of getting angry and starting another fight, Lee Min-soo took a deep breath and decided not to give that damn guard anything he could use against them. Even so, the other group kept making fun of the people from Class A, saying they were nothing. After all, in the rehabilitation center, the ranking had nothing directly to do with fighting ability. The ranking only represented how serious the crime had been. Of course, the worse the crime, the more likely it was that the criminal was also a better fighter. But everyone in that group was rank C, meaning they were nothing but a bunch of fraudsters. They did not need physical strength. They wanted to control the world with money because because, according to them, money was power. With enough money, they could do whatever they wanted. Later, in the bathroom, that same group started smoking inside the closed space, where an elderly man was taking a shower and struggling with all the heat. When Wang Hyuk saw what was happening, he immediately went to help the old man. However, while trying to save him, he ended up getting beaten by the group. This time though, he finally fought back. Later, Lee Min-soo and Moon Hyun-jun noticed that Wang Hyuk had been left behind like that. So Lee Min-soo went to ask his brother for a favor and wondered if he could at least help a little. Kang Yu-sung simply told them to avoid causing trouble at least once. Lee Min-soo replied that he had made a mistake by trusting him. Just then, the other guard showed up and asked what he had said. He wanted to know what Lee Min-soo meant by calling him brother, and also asked what the relationship between the two of them actually was. Suddenly, Ga Se-jun appeared and called Kang Yu-sung big brother, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Kang Yu-sung then explained to the other guard that he simply had a good relationship with some of the prisoners, and nothing more. Even so, the guard warned him to be careful, because, in the line of work they were in, things could go downhill very quickly. If he ended up getting involved with trash again, it could eventually lead to a report being filed against him. Luckily, Kang Yu-sung managed to get out of that situation. Lee Min-soo commented that Ga Se-jun had done a good job, but warned him not to get the wrong idea. After all, he was not helping some spoiled rich kid. Lee Min-soo also asked whether Ga Se-jun was standing up against his own leader, and the two almost started fighting again. That was when Kang Yu-sung grabbed both of them by the neck and called them idiots. Lee Min-soo still asked whether he was going to help their group or not, but Kang Yu-sung told him to shut up. They had almost been caught because of him. From the way things were going, Lee Min-soo seemed like he wanted to rot inside rehabilitation forever. After that, Kang Yu-sung also told Ga Se-jun to stay alert and keep an eye on Lee Min-soo, because otherwise the two of them would end up getting screwed. If Ga Se-jun did not listen, Kang Yu-sung would double his training. Later, the nurses were teaching the prisoners how to put adult diapers on the elderly. Lee Min-soo was not particularly stressed about the work until he saw that same Class C group doing something stupid again. They were using the diapers for a childish and completely ridiculous game. When Lee Min-soo tried to start a fight and fell for their provocation, Ga Se-jun stopped him. He reminded Lee Min-soo that his brother had told him to stay quiet. However, when Lee Min-soo saw the condition Wang Hyuk was in, he almost started fighting again. This time, Ga Se-jun slapped the back of his neck and told him to stay quiet, because that guard was recording everything and would use any fight as evidence against them. Meanwhile, the rest of Oh Tae-sung's team was talking with the real leader, Park Tae-ho. They were already tired of pretending to be that guy's subordinates. Every time Oh Tae-sung opened his mouth to say something, they felt like beating the crap out of him. Park Tae-ho explained that their act would not last much longer. They were only taking advantage of the situation to live a little more comfortably. Soon, they would grab an opportunity to climb even higher. Their goal was to reach the place where the truly strong people were, the ones who received the biggest privileges. That was where the prisoners in red uniforms stayed. There was a rumor that they were choosing a new candidate, and one of the best candidates was right there. After all, Ga Se-jun had lost to Lee Min-soo. Because of that, Park Tae-ho planned to take down both of them to prove his own worth. As he walked through the halls, Lee Min-soo realized that they had been right. Ga Se-jun and his brother had been right all along. He just needed to endure everything and could not let his brother get involved in what he was doing. But while he was thinking about that, they provoked him again. They simply would not leave the kid alone. This time, they stuck a foot out in front of him to make him trip and fall. But before Lee Min-soo could get into another fight, because apparently fighting was the only thing he knew how to do, Nurse Ga Se-min appeared to help him. She wiped his face with a piece of tissue and told him that Lee Min-soo's brother would not want to see him getting involved in that kind of situation. Lee Min-soo did not understand how she knew about his brother until he looked at the nurse's badge. That was when he recognized the name, Ga Se-min, Ga Se-jun. At that moment, everything finally made sense. After that, Lee Min-soo went to Ga Se-jun and returned the slap to the back of his neck that he had received earlier, asking if he wanted to settle things one-on-one. Ga Se-jun replied that he would love to. If there was one thing that would make him happy, it was beating the crap out of those idiots who had been provoking the two of them all day. He was also at his limit. Later, on the rooftop, Ga Se-min asked if they were running late. At least Kang Yu-sung showed up with an iced tea for her. She had actually called him up there because she wanted to thank him. Thanks to Kang Yu-sung, she had managed to reunite with her brother. He replied that he was only returning the favor. After all, he had only been able to do all of that because of her too. The two of them were having a really good moment, maybe a little too good. At one point, however, Kang Yu-sung asked if she had ever heard about the red uniforms in the rehabilitation center. Ga Se-min seemed like she did not know what he was talking about, so Kang Yu-sung explained that it was not surprising because the other guards never talked about it. The area where those prisoners stayed was completely restricted. Even so, he said it was time to go back because he had no idea what kind of trouble his brother might cause there. At the very least, he asked Ga Se-min to keep an eye on Lee Min-soo. She replied that she had just seen Lee Min-soo in the halls, doing his best to hold himself back from getting into a fight. To her, that had been impressive. Kang Yu-sung replied that he was his brother, so of course he was amazing. After all, he knew how to obey when he needed to. Meanwhile, the others were throwing punches. Lee Min-soo, Ga Se-jun, and the annoying group were fighting in the halls. Of course, something like that was bound to happen sooner or later. At that moment, before Lee Min-soo and Ga Sejun actually started fighting the others, the two of them pretended they were going to settle everything one-on-one. In the middle of the rank C group, they started provoking each other, with one insulting the other's mother, and the other firing back by talking about his sister. The people around them got excited and kept adding fuel to the fire, but the first person to get punched was actually the guy who had tried to make the situation worse. In the end, the argument between the two of them was nothing more than an excuse to let them beat up their real targets. Ga Sejun stepped on the head of the first guy who got in his way, and made it clear that he would first pay back everything they had done to the people on his team. After that, he would deal with the matter involving his sister. Meanwhile, Otaesong was smoking in a storage room with guard Shin, the very guard he had bribed to frame Lee Min-soo. He handed over another part of the bribe that was keeping the whole operation going, and asked Shin to try contacting the special cell. The guard replied that even he did not have the authority to do that. Then, a rank C prisoner showed up to report that Ga Sejun and Lee Min-soo were beating up their people. Shin immediately stood up, ready to frame them using the camera footage, but Otaesong said that he was already planning to deal with the two of them, and Park Tae-ho would be his secret weapon. They were led to the location, but Ga Se-men ended up overhearing the entire plan. Meanwhile, only Ga Se-jun was actually doing the beating. Lee Min-soo was just watching and shouting words of encouragement. In reality, he was returning the favor because his brother had put Ga Se-jun on his case, so he planned to use Ga Se-jun to take down their enemies. When Ga Se-jun was finally surrounded and held down by the other team, that was when Lee Min-soo jumped into the fight. He hit the first guy he saw with a flying kick, and then kicked the second guy right in the groin. At one point, Ga Se-jun was cornered against a wall. The big guy took the opportunity to punch him, but Ga Se-jun managed to counterattack. That strategy of trapping him against the wall would not work on him anymore. When Ga Se-jun hit back, Lee Min-soo realized that he had gotten much stronger. At the same time, he thought that he had also improved a lot since the last time they fought. Even though the two of them were constantly fighting each other, they were handling the situation surprisingly well together. In the end, after taking down everyone else, the two of them started fighting each other. But before things could go too far, Park Tae-ho knocked Lee Min-soo down with his brute strength. Then he went after Ga Se-jun and asked why the former candidate would not fight him right there and settle things once and for all. Ga Se-jun tried to take Park Tae-ho down with a single kick to the face, but the attack did not even scratch his opponent. Park Tae-ho realized that Ga Se-jun had been a weakling all along. He then hit back with a heavy blow that was much stronger than the one he had received. When Lee Min-soo got back on his feet, he was confronted by Oh Tae-sung, who apparently had control over Park Tae-ho. He offered Lee Min-soo a chance to join their team. According to him, once he got his red uniform, he would take very good care of the boy. At that moment, Lee Min-soo immediately remembered the man who had handed him the shampoo while he was taking a shower. After all, that man had also been wearing a red uniform. Even so, Lee Min-soo replied that he was not going to let go of all the crap they had done to him. That was when Oh Tae-sung put a bag over Lee Min-soo's head and started beating him in a completely cowardly way. While doing it, he explained that he had also brought someone much stronger than Ga Se-jun to fight. Park Tae-ho might have been from a lower class, but his strength was definitely at a class A level. Meanwhile, Ga Se-jun was getting badly beaten. He remembered the beating he had received from Lee Min-soo and wanted to return that humiliation. Even while dealing with all that pain, he could still land a few hits. However, Park Tae-ho was simply much stronger. Ga Se-jun remembered the day he had asked Kang Yu-sung to teach him how to fight. At the time, Kang Yu-sung had already said that Ga Se-jun was definitely much better than Lee Min-soo. He had good reach, and that was exactly the advantage he needed to use. But in that fight, Lee Min-soo had every advantage: long reach, strength, and stamina. Ga Se-jun simply could not fight him that way. That was why Kang Yu-sung taught Ga Se-jun not to give up and to become much more resilient. That was exactly why Ga Se-jun got back on his feet, determined to show the difference between himself and Park Tae-ho. He moved forward, trying to close the distance, but he was still at a disadvantage and could only block the attacks. Even so, he blocked everything with his eyes wide open because he trusted the training he had received. The first training Kang Yu-sung gave him was specifically about blocking. He would hit Ga Se-jun, who had to defend against the attacks without turning his face away or closing his eyes. Because even if he could keep blocking like that, eventually all his limbs would start getting tired, his guard would open, and he would take a direct hit. Ga Se-jun even asked if the training was really just about blocking, because he would never become stronger that way. But Kang Yu-sung explained that, of course, he would become stronger. He only needed to think about why he had lost to Lee Min-soo. Maybe it was because he had gotten angry, or because he had ended up cornered, but the truth was that he had lost simply because he was not watching Lee Min-soo's movements. That training was all about watching the opponent's movements. By blocking with his eyes wide open, Ga Se-jun was finally able to see everything. He started noticing when Park Tae-ho took a deep breath and when he moved his shoulder and elbow too much. That allowed him to understand that a heavy, long attack was coming, but it would also be slow. Because of that, Ga Se-jun simply lowered his head and dodged. After all, the bigger the movement, the bigger the opening the opponent left behind. Park Tae-ho started getting angry because Ga Se-jun had been doing nothing but blocking the entire time. But in the next second, Ga Se-jun took advantage of the fact that he had already memorized Park Tae-ho's movement patterns and fired back with a straight punch to the jaw. Park Tae-ho was not only losing control of the fight, but also losing control of his own emotions. Now that he could land land almost every hit. Ga-Seijin realized how stupid he had been at the beginning. He had never stopped to think that simply watching his enemy could allow him to win so easily. He finally understood why he had lost to Lee Min-soo, and the one thing those two situations had in common was Kang Yu-sung. So Ga-Seijin started wondering just how strong that man really was, while he beat Park Taeho's face, until the man finally fell to the floor, spitting blood. Even so, Ga-Seijin still wondered if he was far behind Lee Hyun-soo, since Lee Hyun-soo had managed to deal with everyone by himself. But when he looked around, he realized that Lee Min-soo was being, in quotes, tortured by Oh Tae-sung. Lee Min-soo was screaming that it hurt like hell, but in reality, the guy was just a weakling. None of those punches hurt even a little. It looked like he was getting beaten with a balloon. After all the training he had received, all the beatings he had taken, and everything he had already endured, that was nothing. So when Oh Tae-sung started talking about Lee Min-soo's mother, he finally took the bag off his head and hit back, kicking Oh Tae-sung right in the balls. He made it clear that it was revenge for his roommates and also for that other grandma. That was when guard Shin asked what was going on. Kang Yu-sung came with him because he had told them not to fight. Lee Min-soo explained that, this time, he had not been the one who started it. Ga-Seijin was getting beaten, so he decided to help, but Kang Yu-sung smacked him on the head and made it clear that it was still fighting. You idiot. Ga-Seijin eventually confessed that he had been the one who started the fight. Those guys had been trying to cause trouble for his sister, and had also been provoking the elderly people at the nursing home. Guard Shin then realized that they had started the whole mess, and were now acting arrogant on top of it. Because of that, he decided to write a disciplinary report against them, but Ga-Semin reminded him that the guard should have been getting ready for something else. Shin asked why a civilian was getting involved in the matter, and that was when Ga-Semin revealed that she had a very interesting video to show him. She had recorded the entire conversation between Shin and the rich Oh Tae-sung, including all the bribes he had received. Ga-Semin then asked what crimes were listed there, such as falsifying official documents, accepting bribes, and forgery. Guard Shin tried to rush at her to grab the phone, but Kang Yu-sung took him down. He thought it was lucky that Ga-Semin had shown up because things could have become an even bigger problem. Because of that, Kang Yu-sung immediately called the command center to report everything that had happened, but Guard Shin revealed that he was not the only one accepting bribes. The people wearing the red uniforms did it too. Thanks to that information, Kang Yu-sung canceled the report and decided to let the situation go that time. In exchange, however, Shin would have to explain in detail who those people in red uniforms really were. After a week of volunteer work and kitchen duty, Lee Min-soo managed to earn 100 points in total, leaving him with 50 positive points. The guards were still as brutal as ever, and the prisoners continued fighting among themselves. Even though he occasionally saw Sarah, he still had not answered her letter, but he promised himself that he would give her a response the next time he delivered food. Before that, however, Kang Yu-sung took his brother somewhere else. On the way, they passed by Ga-Sejun's cell, where he was training like a madman. Lee Min-soo was even a little scared by what he saw, so Kang Yu-sung tricked his brother by telling him to clean that room, even though the guard himself had already cleaned it. After that, Kang Yu-sung handcuffed Lee Min-soo because they were starting a new kind of training. Kang Yu-sung grabbed a box filled with tennis balls, got ready to throw one like a baseball player, and told his brother to dodge it. Lee Min-soo did not understand what was going on at first, but he managed to avoid the first ball. The second one almost knocked his teeth out. Kang Yu-sung explained that what Lee Min-soo was missing now was the instinct needed to react to unexpected variables and crisis situations. Lee Min-soo replied that he had already beaten Ga-Sejun and Jang Duobo, so he did not need all that training, but Kang Yu-sung admitted that he really had beaten both of them, and asked why exactly he had won. There were 3 ways to fight: instinct, strategy, and strength. The problem was that nobody could rely only on one of those sides. Lee Min-soo had beaten Ga-Sejun by using a strategy that trapped him, and then defeated Jang Duobo with a strategy based on movement and leverage. Kang Yu-sung was teaching Ga-Sejun how to use basic strategies, so if Lee Min-soo fought him again, he would probably lose. Lee Min-soo replied that, in that case, he would train until he could beat Ga-Sejun the next time. Then he asked his brother if Kang Yu-sung did not hate fighting. Kang Yu-sung replied that he definitely did. Even so, he thought he had to do all of this because the rehabilitation center was a much more dangerous place than he had imagined. The night before, Kang Yu-sung had been drinking with guard Shin, who was keeping his side of the deal, and managed to find out everything he knew. Shin did not have many details, but he made it clear that this was definitely a very dangerous matter. The prisoners wearing red uniforms were personally selected by the director of the rehabilitation center. They carried out tasks that the guards could not or did not want to do, and in return, they received special privileges. The most common type of task was making sure someone did not get released or rehabilitated. The official purpose of the rehabilitation center was, obviously, to rehabilitate prisoners, but there was a lot of dirty business behind it. For the president, simply sending those people back into society would be a huge problem, so the solution was to keep them inside the rehabilitation center for as long as possible. Kang Yu-sung asked if there was not a points-based evaluation system. Guard Shin simply replied that he was still very innocent. Nobody left the rehabilitation center in good condition, because that was exactly what the prisoners in red uniforms were there to prevent. They carried out the tasks the guards could not do, especially against those who had earned enough points to escape rehabilitation. They turned those people into stragglers or weakened them. In other words, getting through the rehabilitation process in one piece was practically impossible. That was why Kang Yusung was so dedicated to training his brother. Even if it made Lee Min-soo suffer at that moment, everything was being done with his best interests in mind. Meanwhile, even after his latest failure, in very big quotation marks, Oh Tae-sung, the rich guy with the buck teeth, was meeting with another candidate named Lee Kang-min. He tried to impress him by showing off his business plans and explaining that he could keep his businesses running even from inside the rehabilitation center. With a few subordinates, they could organize betting pools. In the end, it was not that different from society outside. As long as someone had money, people would obey. Lee Kang-min replied that Oh Tae-sung really was different from the others because he could build power using money. Since people in the civil engineering field would understand that very quickly, Oh Tae-sung asked why they did not form an alliance. Together, they could even create a special unit, and Lee Kang-min would receive 20% of the profits, which would be almost 4 million a month. On top of that, the two of them could help each other get the red uniforms. But Lee Kang-min refused the offer. No matter how good the plan was, he would not work for anyone because it could end up hurting his reputation. Oh Tae-sung replied that he would give him some more time to think, and then introduced one of his subordinates, An Chul-do, who was there specifically to deal with Lee Kang-min. And it was not just An Chul-do. Several other cell leaders were also there, including Park Tae-ho. Lee Kang-min was surrounded by all of them, so Oh Tae-sung asked if he had changed his mind now, but Lee Kang-min simply replied that it was genuinely impressive. Oh Tae-sung had managed to hire several good fighters using money. Even so, Lee Kang-min asked if he really thought 4 men would be enough to stop him. Apparently that guy was really greedy. Even 4 men still would not be enough to hold Lee Kang-min down. Meanwhile, Lee Min-soo was still being trained by his brother in what looked more like torture, having to dodge tennis balls. This time, he managed to keep going for quite a while. Already used to Kang Yusung's attack pattern, he dodged the first one and then the second, which was even faster. Kang Yusung noticed that he was already avoiding unnecessary movements and was not wasting his dodges. After some time, Lee Min-soo asked if that was not enough already. Kang Yusung thought that, as expected from his brother, Lee Min-soo might not have learned anything before coming to that place, but he had an amazing talent, so the two of them moved on to stage 2. The first ball was thrown at Lee Min-soo's feet, and he managed to jump out of the way. The second one came straight at his chin and knocked him down. Kang Yusung explained that direct attacks were stage 1 because they were the most predictable and easiest to dodge. Stage 2 was meant to help Lee Min-soo gain experience dealing with attacks coming from multiple angles. He had already learned something similar before, with hook punches coming from both sides, followed by an attack from below. Now, he had to do the opposite. Instead of attacking, he had to dodge the entire combination. He also had to do it while wearing handcuffs because his arms could be used for both defense and offense. Even so, he was only supposed to use them if he could not dodge. Lee Min-soo accepted the training, but he asked why the other person was there with him too. At that moment, Ga Se-jin tried to hit Kang Yusung using a rope tied around his right wrist and right ankle. Kang Yusung admitted that he was improving a lot, but still had a long way to go. In fact, those ropes were tied to several parts of Ga Se-jun's body, running through all 4 limbs and his waist. Kang Yusung explained that both of them had asked to become stronger, but he was only guiding their training. The ones who needed the willpower to become stronger were the 2 of them. If they could not make it through that hell, they would never become stronger. Even so, Kang Yusung wanted to find out, after all of it was over, which of the 2 would become more powerful. Later, Shin went to check how the meeting between Lee Kang-min and Oh Tae-sung had ended. As expected, Lee Kang-min had taken down all 4 of them. Desperate, Oh Tae-sung asked the officer for help, but he was ignored because Shin was also working for Lee Kang-min. At that moment, Shin received a call because Lee Kang-min's people were carrying out a job outside the rehabilitation center. Finally, Shin got his revenge on Oh Tae-sung by kicking him, since he had almost gotten reported because of his failed plan. Then, Lee Kang-min ordered Oh Tae-sung to give him the safe's password. Oh Tae-sung asked how he knew about it, but Lee Kang-min simply replied that his people outside were taking care of the situation. They had found Oh Tae-sung's hideout, taken everyone down, and finally managed to get the 200 million that was inside the safe. For his help, Shin would receive 10% of the profit. After that, Lee Kang-min said that he did not want anything more to do with the situation because he needed to meet with some people. When Lee Min-soo returned to the kitchen, he got a terrible surprise. He could no longer work there. Jang Dubo also had no idea what was going on until Officer Shin explained that they had needed to cut some people from the kitchen because there were too many workers. Because of that, Lee Min-soo was assigned to the construction team. Lee Min-soo thought that this could mess up his brother's plan, but he agreed anyway since he would still earn the points and there was no reason for anything to go wrong. Jang Dubo, however, was worried and told Lee Min-soo to be careful. Moving him from the kitchen to construction was part of someone's plan. When he arrived there, Lee Min-soo found himself in a very hostile environment, with everyone staring at him. However, Lee Kang-min approached him in a friendly way, holding the gloves that would be part of Lee Min-soo's equipment, and introducing himself as the leader of the construction team. Everyone was very respectful toward their leader, and the new recruit as well. For a moment, Lee Min-soo even thought that the place was not so bad after all, but Lee Kang-min was watching Lee Min-soo in a different way. A little before all of that happened, a girl had visited the men's rehabilitation center, wearing one of the red uniforms to speak with Lee Kang-min. She was Park Hyo-shin. The construction construction team had not expected to see a woman inside that rehabilitation center. Lee Kang-min, however, simply ordered everyone to show respect, making them lower their heads. Park Hyo-shin asked if he was some kind of gangster and whether he was having fun there. Lee Kang-min replied that everyone was trustworthy and that none of them would move until he gave the signal. Despite all that familiarity between them, Lee Kang-min claimed that he had never met Park Hyo-shin before. She replied that she was there to deliver a message that day and asked if he had been disappointed by her appearance. Lee Kang-min answered that it was not exactly that and that he had simply been surprised by the arrival of someone new. Park Hyo-shin continued by saying that he was very handsome and that the way he looked at her made her feel shy. This made Lee Kang-min think that she seemed weak, but at the same time, she was wearing a red uniform. Because of that, he asked what had made someone like her enter such a terrible place. Park Hyo-shin explained that she was there to inform him that 3 candidates had been chosen once again. The first was Lee Kang-min himself. The second was Ha Son-chul from the maintenance team. The third was the leader of Class A, Lee Min-soo. Im Ji-soo had named him as a candidate. Lee Kang-min understood the first 2 because they had already proven their worth. So, Park Hyo-shin asked whether he had also proven himself. For her, that still was not enough. Everything Lee Kang-min had accomplished up to that point had been thanks to his brother. Lee Kang-min was shocked to discover that Park Hyo-shin knew his brother. She continued by saying that he had always been the rabbit hiding behind the tiger, and once a rabbit, always a rabbit. However, maybe he could finally prove that he was a tiger too. Lee Kang-min took off his glasses and asked if she wanted him to finish her off right there. Park Hyo-shin replied that he still had a long way to go, and that those provocations had no basis at all. Then, she asked if he really thought she looked weak. At first, Lee Kang-min really had that impression, but now he felt something strange. Park Hyo-shin told him not to take it personally. Lee Kang-min was still a very strong candidate, and that had not changed. That was exactly why she wanted to see how far his potential could go. If he managed to defeat one of the other candidates, he would prove his own worth. After that, Park Hyo-shin said goodbye, telling him that they might meet again. It was another meeting of the red uniforms. Lee Kang-min was very tense because of the whole situation, and nervous around that girl, but he thought that he only needed to defeat one of the other 2 candidates, and of course his main target ended up being Lee Min-soo, who seemed to be the weakest. In fact, nobody knew how Lee Min-soo was still alive in that place. Because of that, Lee Kang-min gave a signal to his subordinates, who were already ready to test the boy. Meanwhile, Lee Min-soo was actually quite happy with his construction job. Maybe he was more talented at it than he had imagined. Suddenly, purely by instinct, he dodged a hammerhead that came spinning past his face. The person who had thrown it said that it had been a little loose and that it was an accident. The next moment, Lee Min-soo tripped over a rope and almost fell face first onto a board covered in nails. The other person involved apologized, saying that they had probably forgotten the rope there. That was when Lee Min-soo realized that they were trying to take him down. None of it made sense as a series of accidents. It was probably intentional. While he was working with a saw to cut some things, one of the workers stopped Lee Min-soo and told him that he could not do it that way. Lee Min-soo thanked him, thinking that not everyone there was so bad after all. Maybe the other incidents really had been nothing more than accidents. That continued until everyone joined together to restrain Lee Min-soo and throw him toward the saw, causing his hand to be cut. However, he was saved when someone turned off the lights. When the lights came back on, everyone who had been tormenting Lee Min-soo was lying on the ground, as if someone had knocked them out. Lee Min-soo made it clear that he had not done it. Then, when he found himself surrounded by everyone else from the engineering team, he realized that it was a trap. He could not fight back because he would lose points. So, he shouted for the guards, but they simply ignored him and continued talking and drinking coffee. When the others moved toward him, Lee Min-soo realized that the guards were also on the side of those maniacs. Meanwhile, Ga Sejun was extremely tired because of his own training. Kang Yu-sung noticed that it had gotten late and said that they could leave the storage room. Ga Sejun had already been there for so long that people would start getting suspicious. Even so, he asked for one more attempt, saying that he would succeed this time. He did not want to fall behind because Lee Min-soo was already at training level 2 while he was still at level 1. He could not lose to Lee Min-soo. Using his instinct training, Lee Min-soo managed to dodge the attacks from several members of the engineering team. Lee Kang-min admitted that he was much better than expected, but even so, Lee Min-soo was not counterattacking anyone. He kept saying that he did not want trouble with anyone, and that he only wanted to earn his credit, get his points, and leave. Lee Kang-min thought that reason was unbelievable, so, on purpose, he called the guards who were outside to go smoke. With that, Lee Min-soo was free to counterattack. First, he hit the bald man in the face with an elbow. Against the second one, he dodged the attack and landed a kick on his chin. Lee Kang-min already had an idea, but now he had proof that Lee Min-soo had not defeated Ga Sejun or Jang Dubo by luck. Lee Min-soo asked why he had done that, and whether he was sure that Lee Kang-min had set everything up. Lee Kang-min simply answered that he was a candidate, just like Lee Min-soo. Lee Min-soo said that he did not care about any of that, and did not even know what a candidate was. He only wanted to earn his volunteer work points, and get out of that place. Park Hyo-shin had already warned Lee Kang-min that Lee Min-soo did not even know he was a candidate, so, he explained that he had simply been waiting for his subordinates to do the work. The intention had been to eliminate another candidate, but being compared to someone who had no idea what was happening was ridiculous. Because of that, he decided to kill Lee Min-soo right there. Lee Min-soo Min-soo then replied that there was no reason to keep judging him like a child, and told Lee Kang-min to come at him already. Then, he held up both middle fingers, making it clear that he was not intimidated in the slightest. Later, the two of them were in the middle of a circle, formed by the engineering class. Since everyone in that reform center loved watching a fight, Lee Min-soo was having a very hard time dodging all of Lee Kang-min's punches. He was smaller, slimmer, and faster, but Lee Kang-min was far more experienced and looked like a trained boxer. When Lee Min-soo finally tried to fight back, his fist was caught with ease. Lee Kang-min admitted that Lee Min-soo knew how to dodge, but hitting someone was a different story. He then continued his series of punches, hitting Lee Min-soo in the chest and face, and leaving him off balance. Even so, Lee Min-soo waited for the right moment. He dodged another attack and tried to find an opening, but ended up getting hit by Lee Kang-min's elbow. Despite having good form, Lee Kang-min did not fight in a formal way or follow a clean and fair style. Lee Min-soo figured that if he kept dodging the attacks, he would eventually find a few openings. He tried again to land a hit on Lee Kang-min's chest, but ended up being kicked away. The attacks were unpredictable. When Lee Kang-min started a series of kicks, Lee Min-soo realized that he was not a boxer. In fact, he practiced kickboxing. Before Lee Min-soo could take a knee strike that would probably have crushed his nose, Kang Yu-sung, the new guard, stepped in and stopped the fight. Lee Kang-min did not understand why a guard was there at that moment, but Kang Yu-sung was firm and warned that if they continued, he would send both of them to solitary confinement. The other guards came closer, and Kang Yu-sung asked if they had a problem with him and if they had purposely allowed the two to fight there. They answered no, and said that they had only gone outside to smoke and that they would not have been able to stop the fight anyway. Kang Yu-sung, however, said that it was already late and ordered them to stop and return to their cells. Lee Kang-min walked up to Lee Min-soo, but promised that next time he would finish him. Later, Lee Min-soo was cleaning the blood from his nose and asked his brother why he was not angry with him. Kang Yu-sung replied that he was actually confused and did not understand why Lee Min-soo had ended up in the engineering group. Lee Min-soo explained that they had needed to cut some people from the kitchen and that he had been one of the people transferred. Kang Yu-sung thought he had not seen that happen and explained that the change had not been announced to anyone. Maybe someone was targeting Lee Min-soo on purpose. He also explained that something similar had happened in that last fight to what happened in the first fight against Ga Sejun. Lee Min-soo had failed to land a single hit and also could not dodge every attack. Kang Yu-sung said that was natural. Lee Kang-min had very good kickboxing training, so Lee Min-soo could not defeat him the same way he had defeated Ga Sejun and Jung Dubo. Against someone like him, he would need strategy, technique, and experience. Because of that, Kang Yu-sung said there was no other choice but to move on to stage 3 of the training. He would also accompany Lee Min-soo every time he went to the engineering class, until he managed to defeat Lee Kang-min. Meanwhile, besides continuing to train his instincts, Lee Min-soo would also have to increase his own strength. Kang Yu-sung planned to deal directly with the person who was trying to mess with Lee Min-soo. A few weeks later, Lee Kang-min was going through the information he had about one of the people in the red uniforms who had put Lee Min-soo in the engineering group. The problem was that throughout all those weeks, the guard he knew as the newest one had been watching Lee Min-soo. Because of that, Lee Kang-min had not gotten a single chance to eliminate the other candidate. Even after studying the files and documents about Kang Yu-sung, Lee Kang-min could not find any weakness he could use against him. He only needed that guard to be gone for one day so he could take down Lee Min-soo. Because of that, he contacted the people outside and told them to solve the problem. Meanwhile, Kang Yu-sung was outside meeting with Ga Se-min. She apologized for being late, but he said it was no problem and that he had already expected her to take a while. That was why he had arrived 30 minutes later than they had agreed. The two began walking together and seemed very close, almost like a couple. This allowed Lee Kang-min's team, who were outside, to discover the guard's weakness, the girl he cared about so much. Lee Kang-min's people watched the two of them for quite a while, to the point where they even became jealous. They wanted girlfriends too. After the two separated, the gang's trio went straight to Ga Se-min. They approached her to take her away for a moment, making it clear that they did not want to hurt her. The intention was simply to make Kang Yu-sung quit smoking, since Ga Se-min was trying to help him break the habit. Meanwhile, Guard Shin went directly to report to the director of the rehabilitation center over coffee that guard Kang Yu-sung was acting strangely close to Lee Min-soo. He had been watching the boy even in the engineering class, in a way that was far from normal. Shin also ended up asking about the class of the people in the red uniforms. While finishing the coffee and placing the cups on the table, the director of the rehabilitation center explained that he had first put Lee Min-soo in the kitchen to test him, and most of the time, to test Kang Yu-sung's reactions as well. That was why he had sent Shin to the volunteer work. However, he had eventually agreed to a request from the special red uniform class to put Lee Min-soo in the engineering class. Along with that came information that seemed to fit the situation perfectly. Kang Yu-sung Sung was very suspicious. Strangely, he was the only one who was not allowed to access the military network, and everything they knew about him came from the documents they had received. Because of that, they had requested an outside investigation into Kang Yu-sung. Shin said that was fine, but asked why the director and the special group were so interested in Lee Min-soo. The director of the rehabilitation center did not answer directly. The reason was that Lee Min-soo looked like someone else. Meanwhile, once again lost in his thoughts during the shower, Lee Min-soo thought that it had already been 2 weeks since he started training, but he still couldn't tell whether he would be able to beat Lee Kang-min or not. He was facing a type of opponent against whom the tactics he had learned simply didn't work. This time, he had to win based on his own skill. At the very least, he would have to get past level 3 of the training. In the shower, together with the people from Class A, Moon Hyun-jun had already finished using the soap, but he forgot to pass it to the next person. At one point, he let the soap slip and fall. As expected in a place like that, Lee Min-soo caught it before it hit the floor, ruining the prank. Moon Hyun-jun, however, was very impressed by his speed. On top of that, Moon Hyun-jun noticed that Lee Min-soo had become physically stronger. His body looked more defined and muscular. Moon Hyun-jun even noticed it in a slightly suspicious way, but Lee Min-soo didn't seem to realize it at all. When it was time to get dressed, Ga Se-jun told Lee Min-soo that the officer had been absent, apparently because he had taken the day off. Because of that, they wouldn't have training that day. Lee Min-soo replied that, in that case, they could clean the storage room and avoid any trouble. However, another guy from the room, who was wearing an earring, kept Lee Min-soo inside the locker room to talk to him alone. He showed that he had a huge scar on his leg, and explained that he worked for Lee Kang-min and his gang. He then warned Lee Min-soo that if he didn't want to end up weakened, or even go home with a serious injury, he should stop attending the engineering class. Lee Kang-min's gang was extremely cruel. Lee Min-soo replied that maybe it really would be better to stop, especially since the guard who normally accompanied him was also absent. Besides that, he was looking for volunteer work. His classmate continued by saying that Lee Min-soo couldn't go back to the engineering class. Even so, Lee Min-soo thought that he might still have to fight to make the plan work. If he couldn't avoid it, he would fight. Meanwhile, Lee Kang-min's gang was already taking Ga Se-min to their hideout. Lee Kang-min only wanted to get the guard away from rehabilitation for a while. After that, they could do whatever they wanted with the girl. However, Ga Se-min was listening to everything, and already knew part of what was going on. In fact, the conversation she had with Kang Yu-sung the night before had been about exactly that. She had offered herself as bait for the plan. Kang Yu-sung explained that those guys had been watching the two of them very obviously for quite some time, but they could still be dangerous. He said that Kang Yu-sung was probably the real target, and that it was likely connected to the red uniform class and everything that had been happening with him and Lee Min-soo. Ga Se-min, however, saw it as the perfect opportunity to find out who was behind everything. She didn't want to let that chance slip away. Kang Yu-sung was worried because, if he really was the target, she would be used as bait. Even so, Ga Se-min replied that she wasn't worried at all, because, if she were captured, he would show up to save her. And that was exactly what happened. While Ga Se-min was being taken to the hideout, Kang Yu-sung was chasing the car on his motorcycle, determined to save her, and at the same time, find out who was behind everything. Later, Chang Hee, the one who had talked to Lee Min-soo, asked Lee Kang-min to simply ignore the boy. He explained that Lee Min-soo was only trying to get away from the reform school, and didn't want anything beyond that. Lee Kang-min, however, wasn't taking it seriously. He saw the situation not only as a former subordinate, but also as a childhood friend. During elementary school, the two had been inseparable friends. After that, though, Lee Kang-min went on with his own life, while Chang Hee ended up spending a lot of time taking care of his sick mother. Because of that, the two lost contact. Chang Hee got his driver's license as soon as he entered high school, and started working as a delivery driver. Thanks to the generosity of his bosses, he eventually received that motorcycle as a gift. With it, he was able to save money and keep working. Then, one day, Chang Hee delivered food to Lee Kang-min's gang hideout. He only wanted to drop off the food and leave quickly, so he wouldn't get into trouble. However, Lee Kang-min recognized him. Chang Hee, on the other hand, barely recognized him. Lee Kang-min had a completely different look, wearing gold chains and other expensive things. And, of course, he also had those scars on his face. That's when Lee Kang-min offered Chang Hee an opportunity to make easy money. After some time, Chang Hee entered Lee Kang-min's office, where they were already running all kinds of scams. Chang Hee's job was to pretend that something strange had happened with food orders made through delivery apps, such as finding insects in the food, and then submit it as a complaint. Lee Kang-min explained that this alone didn't make any money, but it was part of a bigger process. After those strange reviews and negative comments started appearing about the restaurants, the owners would begin begging Lee Kang-min to take the posts down, and would offer him money in exchange. To Chang Hee, everything seemed very simple. Before long, he received his salary, and realized that it really was easy money. But one of the people most affected by that scam was the very kind boss who had given Chang Hee the motorcycle. The man eventually took his own life after his restaurant went bankrupt, and he lost everything because of that kind of scam. Of course, Chang Hee felt extremely guilty. To him, it was as if he had killed that person. Because of that, Chang Hee went to Lee Kang-min and said that he should turn himself in and confess everything. After all, someone had died because of it. Lee Kang-min, however, grabbed him by the throat and asked why he was feeling guilty. If he was going to think that way, he never should have gotten involved in the business in the first place. Lee Kang-min had had given Chang-hee money and an opportunity to change his life, but now he wanted to confess everything. Lee Kang-min didn't forgive that kind of betrayal. So, using a fountain pen, he made a huge cut on Chang-hee's leg. That was when his brother Lee Kang-won appeared. He was the main boss of the criminal organization and was investigating the situation. Because of that, he ordered Lee Kang-min to abandon the entire operation. Lee Kang-min asked if the boy he had just injured was the one who had reported everything to the police. Lee Kang-won said no. In fact, the problem had started because of Lee Kang-min himself. There were too many victims spread across different places, and the situation had gotten out of control. Since someone had died, an investigation had started. Up to that point, the scheme had worked very well. Even so, Lee Kang-won ordered them to let the boy live. Then, he told his brother Lee Kang-min that he should turn himself in, especially because he was still a minor. If Lee Kang-won was arrested, Lee Kang-min could easily get away because it was his first offense. That was how the two ended up in Class A while still being part of the same gang. However, it was the first time they had spoken since the day they arrived at that place. Later, Lee Kang-min also called Chang-hee to talk about Lee Min-soo, but this time from a completely different perspective. Some of the engineering subordinates held Chang-hee down and slammed his head against the table. Meanwhile, Lee Kang-min picked up a pair of pliers and asked if he knew why he had specifically become the leader of the civil engineering department. The reason was simple. If someone had a workplace accident in that area, nobody would suspect anything. So, Lee Kang-min threatened to rip off Chang-hee's finger, saying that, with something like that, Lee Min-soo would definitely show up looking for a fight. When Lee Kang-min's men arrived at the hideout, they noticed that Ga Se-min was strangely calm. A woman who had been kidnapped shouldn't have been that relaxed. Because of that, they even sent a message to Kang Yu-sung, telling him that he could come pick up his girlfriend at the hideout. There was just one problem. Kang Yu-sung was already there. While they were waiting for the real target to arrive, they tried to make a move on Ga Se-min, but the first person who approached her was greeted with a motorcycle helmet thrown straight into his face. They never expected Kang Yu-sung to be there, so they were caught completely off guard. Even though they had the numbers on their side, he stuck to his surprise attack strategy, using a blitzkrieg-style approach, and, surprisingly, beat every single one of them without any trouble. Some went down with the very first hit, while others took a little longer, but Kang Yu-sung broke their legs as if they were nothing more than puppets. In the end, every one of them was taken down. The smartest one pulled out a knife, but even then, he was quickly restrained and disarmed. Ga Se-min thought Kang Yu-sung was a real monster. She actually thought it was pretty cool, so he earned a few points with her. After training, Lee Min-soo was completely exhausted and told Ga Se-jin to stop pretending that he was tired too. Ga Se-jin answered that, of course he wasn't tired, even though he was also lying on the floor and breathing heavily. He even said that if Lee Min-soo still had enough energy to talk, then he could fight a little longer. Lee Min-soo simply replied that he was going to say that he had passed stage 3 that day. Ga Se-jin told him that if he was going to lie, he should at least do it well, but Lee Min-soo fired back that someone at stage 2 like him would never understand. Just then, guard Shin asked what the two of them were doing, since they were supposed to be cleaning. Both of them simply answered that they were resting because they were extremely tired. However, Shin was actually there to deliver a present to Lee Min-soo, a gift from Chang-hee. He also warned that if Lee Min-soo did not show up within an hour, another present would arrive. That present would be Chang-hee's finger, ripped straight off. After Kang Yu-sung managed to take everyone down and free Ga Se-min, she still complained that he had taken too long because her arms were already hurting. He apologized and explained that he had tried to finish as quickly as possible. She accepted his apology with a lot of regret, saying that they had actually misunderstood the plan. What they really wanted was to get Kang Yu-sung out of the reformatory. The person behind everything was Lee Kang-min, who wanted to get the guard out of the prison so he could deal with Lee Min-soo. Kang Yu-sung, however, thought that he had already warned his brother not to come anywhere near that place until he passed stage 3. Because of that, he believed his brother should be fine. Just then, a deep voice echoed through the warehouse, saying that he already knew his brother was planning something and had been quietly watching everything. It was Lee Kang-won, who said that his fists were itching for a fight. He asked if Kang Yu-sung also wanted to fight, since he had already seen his level of combat. Both of them had been waiting for an opponent who could actually challenge them, so they could have a little fight. Meanwhile, Chang-hee, already missing a finger, had his hand stepped on by Lee Kang-min just as Lee Min-soo arrived. He told Lee Kang-min to get his foot off him. Of course, Lee Min-soo moved forward at that moment, and Lee Kang-min quickly realized that his attacks were still terrible. He could have finished him easily, but his attack was blocked and countered. The next attacks from Lee Kang-min also failed to land. Finally, Lee Min-soo found an opening, but Lee Kang-min kicked him in the face, and he managed to block that too. Lee Kang-min realized that the boy was completely different from the last time they had met. Even the people in engineering noticed the change. It was strange that he had not been hit by Lee Kang-min's kick, since it was extremely fast. However, during all that time, Lee Min-soo had never actually wanted to fight Lee Kang-min, which was why he had not landed a single attack. He only wanted to get Chang-hee out of Lee Kang-min's reach, and he had succeeded. Now, the real fight was finally about to begin. Meanwhile, back in the warehouse, Kang Yu-sung only needed to look into Lee Kang-won's eyes to realize that he was strong. He seemed to be the boss, and had a completely different aura from all the others Kang Yu-sung had already defeated. Lee Kang-won said that the two of them could stay and fight while the girl left. He was going to make Kang Yu-sung pay for messing with his men. In the middle of his speech, Kang Yusung suddenly tried a quick kick, but it was blocked. He kept trying to attack quickly with his legs, but that left a huge opening, allowing Lee Kang-won to punch him directly in the stomach and force him to retreat. Lee Kang-won commented that it was actually strange that Kang Yusung could still walk, because a punch like that would normally break a person's spine. Even though Kang Yusung had blocked the attack, he could really feel that some of his ribs had been broken. He needed to end things quickly because if the fight dragged on, the pain would only get worse. But Lee Kang-won seemed more like a wall than a man. He was deliberately deflecting attacks with other attacks, and enduring the pain because he was playing with Kang Yusung. He even said that things were getting boring, predicted Kang Yusung's next attack, and stepped on his leg. He admitted that Kang Yusung had done pretty well, but said that everyone had a limit. Then he slammed him into the ground with a punch. To Lee Kang-won, Kang Yusung was being predictable, and could be read like a book. Fighting had never been a choice for him. He and his brother had been born to a woman who could not live without her addiction, and neither of them had received even a drop of maternal love. Because of that, they had to grow up through fighting. To Lee Kang-won, getting beaten hurt much less than going hungry. So, by fighting other gangs, he learned how to become difficult to defeat through sheer persistence. Over time, he began to enjoy the satisfaction of always winning his fights. With every victory, he not only became stronger, but also recruited more people. That was how he took over the streets, and eventually formed his current gang. Lee Kang-won told Kang Yusung that he was pretty strong and in fact quite skilled. He was not bad at all for someone who had completed his studies. However, book nerds like him always did the same things and were extremely predictable. Since that had completely killed his mood, Lee Kang-won tried to find something else to entertain himself. But he did not like the look in Ga Semin's eyes, which remained full of defiance. When she suddenly got scared, Lee Kang-won became happier, but he quickly realized that she had not been frightened because of him. She had gotten scared because Kang Yusung had stood back up. He admitted that his attacks were simple, but they got the job done. Besides, they were orders from his teacher. Against simple people, he was supposed to use basic attacks. But Lee Kang-won was not a normal person, so Kang Yusung was no longer going to hold back. While that was happening, the fisherman who was with the lawmaker celebrated the fish he had caught. Even so, he felt a little disappointed because the lawmaker had caught an entire tuna. The military officer told Juxi that he thought his son would give up on the training. Because of that, he had arranged for him not to apply for the regular non-commissioned officer career, but instead to become an assistant with the special forces. Juxi replied that he had used his connections to make that happen, and thanked him very much. During special forces training, 4 out of every 10 people quit, mainly because they have to do all kinds of things. There is parachute jumping, nighttime infiltration, mountain marches, and survival training. Because of that, people who are not athletic usually do not even apply. But Kang Yusung not only refused to quit, he also graduated as the best in his class, and broke every possible record. The military officer then asked what that boy's true identity was. The lawmaker replied that, in order to adopt the boy, he had required him to become both smart and powerful. Because of that, he had him trained by the strongest warrior he knew. The military officer was shocked because he knew exactly who the lawmaker was talking about. The boy had been trained by a former North Korean soldier and special agent who was known as a completely insane monster. Kang Yusung stood up inside the warehouse and said that his teacher had taught him to use only basic moves against civilians, but since he was now facing a major criminal, he was going to use everything he had. Lee Kang-won noticed that the boy's aura had changed, but thought it had to be nothing more than a bluff. Kang Yusung was still walking around with his guard completely open, so Lee Kang-won charged forward like before, as if nothing had changed, but his punch was dodged and immediately countered. Kang Yusung was much faster. Lee Kang-won kept trying to hit him until his next punch landed directly on Kang Yusung's head, but Kang Yusung had intentionally chosen not to dodge it. He endured the pain so he could grab Lee Kang-won's arm and break it with his next move. From that point on, Kang Yusung started blocking Lee Kang-won's punches with his elbows, pulling his limbs and preventing him from fighting properly. His attacks were aimed at vital points, such as the organs and the neck. Ga Semin realized that earlier, when Kang Yusung was fighting the gang members, he had only been trying to defeat them. Now, he was fighting to kill. Meanwhile, the people in engineering were also impressed by the other fight, because Lee Min-soo was managing to dodge even Lee Kang-min's famous kicks. He avoided the punches, blocked some kicks, and took a few hits so he could try to counterattack, but he still could not land a single clean blow. Lee Min-soo had trained his instincts a lot, but he had not trained his actual attacks nearly as much. But then Lee Kang-min's next high kick was caught, and Lee Min-soo was insanely excited about that moment. He had been waiting specifically for the chance to grab one of those high kicks. During his stage 3 training, he had to deal with several tennis balls at once. Against some of them he would dodge, while against others he would deflect them with his attacks. That was instinct, knowing what to do when an attack came at him. Kang Yusung realized that his brother could already handle 5 balls at the same time without any trouble. Lee Min-soo then became curious about something and asked his brother whether even professional fighters did not dodge every single attack. After all, there were plenty of moments when they simply exchanged blows. pros. Kang Yu-sung explained that they did. Professionals thought about which attacks were worth taking, and sometimes even took a hit on purpose. They did that when they were sure that taking that hit would allow them to land a much stronger counterattack. It was a matter of sacrificing flesh to take the bone. As Lee Min-soo increased the number of balls, he would eventually reach a point where he could no longer dodge every single one. At that point, he would have to choose which ball to avoid, which one to block, and which one to take. That was exactly the strategy he used when he intentionally took Lee Kang-min's high kick. He sacrificed his flesh to take the bone and punched Lee Kang-min's knee joint until it broke. When Lee Kang-min fell onto one knee, with his other leg touching the floor, he received a full punch straight to the face. Lee Min-soo even told him not to fall because there was still plenty more beating coming. After that, Gae Se-min walked over to Kang Yu-sung as gently as she could and told him that his face looked even more swollen and weird. Although she was joking, she was genuinely worried. She was crying beside him, saying that he could have ended the fight much faster. Kang Yu-sung apologized, but he thought that Lee Kang-won really had not been an easy opponent. If he had not broken his arm right at the beginning, he might have lost. Then, suddenly, the rest of the gang entered the warehouse. One of the men Kang Yu-sung had taken down first had already woken up and managed to call the others, but Lee Kang-won himself stood up and slammed the head of the subordinate who had made the call against the warehouse's concrete floor. He said that he was so ashamed that he could die right there. That fight was between him and that bastard, so nobody was going to interfere. After that, Lee Kang-won was carried away by his own men and declared that Kang Yu-sung was free because of his victory. Even so, he promised that he would win the next time. Kang Yu-sung replied that, if it were up to him, he would never have to see that criminal's ugly face again. Meanwhile, the people in the engineering room were also shocked when they realized that their boss was losing. Right after landing those attacks, Lee Min-soo started dodging all of Lee Kang-min's attacks and began landing increasingly precise counters. They were not very powerful because Lee Min-soo still did not have much physical strength, but after taking so many hits, Lee Kang-min was already starting to fall. Even so, Lee Min-soo kept ordering him to get back up again and again. At one point, Lee Kang-min grabbed a screwdriver to get his revenge. Before he could use it to attack, however, Chang-hee grabbed his arm. Right after that, Lee Min-soo landed another punch directly in his face. Lee Kang-min couldn't believe he was getting beaten up by Lee Min-soo. He had no idea how the boy had gotten so strong in such a short amount of time. He realized that he could not win, and the next punch sent him falling outside the area designated for the fight. Everyone watching was completely stunned. Lee Kang-min thought the whole thing had been Chang-he's fault and told the others that he had interfered in the fight. The men agreed, but they also reminded him that Lee Kang-min was losing even with that interference. So he said that his gang needed to step in. If he failed as a candidate, everyone there would end up struggling too. Lee Kang-min explained to Lee Min-soo that his organization was also part of his strength and that he would never be able to handle so many people at once. Even while surrounded, Lee Min-soo tried to fight and managed to take down several men right away. However, his fists were already badly injured because of the strike he had used to break Lee Kang-min's leg, and he was also extremely tired. Because of that, he was caught and restrained shortly afterward. The gang was about to brutally beat him to death, but Ga Si-jun arrived and started beating the hell out of everyone. He even asked whether Lee Min-soo had called for his help, at least mentally. Lee Kang-min immediately noticed that the entire mood had changed just because Ga Si-jun had shown up, but things were still not over. The gang also had a powerful subordinate, the former head of engineering before Lee Kang-min, known as Kim Young. Lee Kang-min explained that Kim Young had been the first person to give him trouble when he arrived at the reformatory. Because of that, he should be more than enough to deal with Ga Se-jun, but Ga Se-jun used a different tactic. He covered Kim Young's vision with his palm and quickly moved behind him, landing a sneaky punch that knocked him down immediately. Lee Kang-min said that he did not know why Ga Se-jun was trying to save Lee Min-soo, but it would be better if he listened to him. Then he showed his phone, displaying a picture of Ga Se-min, who had been captured by his men. Lee Kang-min also knew that Ga Se-jun's sister and that guard had a very good relationship. Since his sister had been taken hostage, Ga Se-jun could not do anything else. Lee Min-soo asked if they at least knew where guard Kang Yu-sung was. Lee Kang-min said they did. He had probably gone to get his girlfriend and ended up getting captured too. Before he could even finish the sentence, another punch landed straight in his mouth. Lee Min-soo asked if Lee Kang-min really thought a bunch of men from his own gang could stop guard Kang Yu-sung. Lee Kang-min, however, replied that if Ga Se-jun wanted to save his sister, he would have to kill Lee Min-soo. The two stepped closer and stared at each other for a few seconds. Instead of starting a fight, however, they smiled and shook hands. Lee Min-soo then made it clear that Lee Kang-min had messed with his family. Because of that, Ga Se-jun would finish the job. Ga Se-jun replied that it was the first thing Lee Min-soo had said that he actually liked. Lee Kang-min asked if he was crazy because he was going to kill his sister and promised that he would do it. Ga Se-jun admitted that yes, his sister was in danger, but he was not worried. As long as that man was beside her, she would be safe. Even so, because Lee Kang-min had messed with his sister, Ga Se-jun was going to give his face a good beating. Lee Min-soo took advantage of the engineering leader's phone lying on the floor and used it to call his brother. Kang Yu-sung answered and immediately reminded him that he had told him not to get involved in fights while he was away. But if Lee Min-soo was calling, that meant he had won. Lee Min-soo replied that it was more or less like that. Meanwhile, Ga Sejun kept punching Lee Kang-min in the face over and over, repeating that he should never have messed with his sister. Kang Yu-sung simply told his brother to get out of there quickly before he ended up in solitary confinement again. Ga Se-min, riding the motorcycle, said it was a relief to know that things had also been settled on their side. Kang Yu-sung commented that he had also managed to hear her brother's voice. He sounded very angry because she had been kidnapped. He then asked where they were going. She answered that they were going to the hospital, of course, because he needed to treat his injuries. Kang Yu-sung commented that he would heal on his own eventually. So Ga Se-min made another suggestion. They could go to her place. She had a really cute cat there and wanted to show it to him. Kang Yu-sung understood the suggestion perfectly, especially the part about the cat. When he arrived at the apartment and was left alone with Ga Se-min, he really did see a very cute cat. An orange cat with huge eyes. He also thanked Ga Se-min for the meal she was preparing, but she brushed it off, saying that she was cooking for herself because she was hungry. That was when Kang Yu-sung noticed a family photo in her home. The picture showed Ga Se-min, her brother, and her parents. He commented that he did not know they used to play the piano. Ga Se-min confirmed that they were her family. Her mother was there, and standing beside her was her father's traitor. After finishing the meal, Ga Se-min noticed that Kang Yu-sung had fallen asleep with the cat lying on top of him. She could not believe she had actually cooked for that idiot, only for him to fall asleep. Even so, she grabbed a blanket and placed it over him while he was still lying on the floor. Then she took advantage of the situation and gave him a reverse cuddle, wrapping her arms around Kang Yu-sung's large muscles. After some time, Lee Kang-min was already unconscious, along with every other member of the engineering gang. Lee Min-soo took the opportunity to ask how the hell Ga Se-jun had managed to get there. He simply answered that guard Shin had let him leave. Lee Min-soo was also worried about Chung-hee and his fingers. However, his finger was still in place and had not been cut off. At that moment, before Lee Kang-min could actually remove it with a pair of pliers, guard Shin stopped him, saying that he could bring Lee Min-soo in without having to do that. Lee Min-soo then started wondering whose finger he had actually seen. Just then, Chang-hee drew his attention to his own hand, which was completely swollen and red. It had probably suffered several fractures. In the infirmary, guard Shin cut the finger off a mannequin used for testing. That was what he had used to convince Lee Min-soo that Chang-hee was in danger. When another guard arrived, he commented that they would have to buy a new arm because someone had cut the finger off. The reformatory doctor confirmed that Lee Min-soo's hand was indeed fractured. He would need to avoid putting any strain on that hand and take his medicine properly. The doctor also commented that even though Lee Min-soo had learned his brother's techniques, it seemed that his body still could not keep up with them. Someone in the other bed commented that, at this rate, Lee Min-soo would soon end up wearing a red uniform. It was Oh Tae-sung, the beaver-tooth, who had 90% of his body covered in casts after getting the crap beaten out of him. Oh Tae-sung did not want to reveal all the information unless Lee Min-soo became his subordinate, so Lee Min-soo decided to use the cruelest torture method in existence. He grabbed a feather and started tickling Oh Tae-sung's foot. The method worked perfectly, and Oh Tae-sung ended up revealing everything. Oh Tae-sung explained that everyone who wore a red uniform belonged to a special class that was not supposed to return to society. They were chosen and managed directly by the director of the rehabilitation center. Besides receiving special missions, they also received certain privileges. The most important mission of this class was to take down people who were collecting points to get out of the reformatory. Oh Tae-sung said that Lee Min-soo should already know this because nobody left that place completely unharmed. Everyone left the reformatory carrying something with them, whether it was trauma or a lasting injury, and that did not happen by accident. It was all because of the special class. Lee Min-soo was about to be selected as the next candidate. The members of the special class were genuinely surprised by Lee Kang-min's defeat at Lee Min-soo's hands. They also learned that Ga Se-jun had helped him. Because of that, they could make the two of them fight each other. Im Ji-soo, however, said there was no reason to rush. The selection of the next candidate could wait, especially because a major variable had appeared. One of the candidates had returned to the game. 2 weeks passed after the engineering class incident. Lee Kang-min, punished for the fight, was sent to solitary confinement. The way the others treated him also changed quite a bit after his defeat. Meanwhile, Lee Min-soo not only became the leader of Class A, but also took over the leadership of engineering. The people from Class A said they never expected that to happen. They had gotten a new job in engineering thanks to Lee Min-soo, and they were finding everything much more fun. They had also heard that he had defeated Lee Kang-min, even though he had received some help from Ga Se-jun. At that moment, everyone was hanging out and chatting with Kang Yu-sung. Then another guard appeared and explained that he was taking the boys to their volunteer work. Before he could say anything else, however, the guard who had just arrived struck Kang Yu-sung in the face and ordered everyone to return to their positions. That guard was Yu Sonal, one of the reformatory's wardens. He was an infamous guard who had spent some time away, but had now returned. Of course, after seeing Kang Yu-sung get hit, Lee Min-soo reacted and tried to go after the guard. Class A had to hold him back while Ga Se-jun explained that he was just a little stressed. Then another guard called Yu Sanal, addressing him by the title he had held before all of this, former director of the reformatory. As Yu Sanal walked away, Kang Yu-sung realized that his arrival had added a major variable to his plan. Yu Sanal went to the office of the current director of the rehabilitation center to introduce himself. He was finally back at the rehabilitation center. The director was happy to hear that his problem had been resolved. Yu Sanal Song confirmed that it had, but commented that the guard's discipline seemed to have declined quite a bit. Because of that, he was going to correct the problem. The director of the rehabilitation center became nervous when he realized that Yuson intended to return to work immediately and asked if he would not rather take some more time off. Yuson said no. To him, returning to work was always satisfying. The director of the rehabilitation center already knew that Yuseonal was going to be a headache because he was extremely strict and stubborn. Later, Yuseonal was giving a lesson about what was really supposed to be done in the reformatory. That guard was, quite literally, the first person there who actually did the rehabilitation work. He explained the concept of intertextual context, which could be found in the understanding and relationship between different literary works. Chang'e was already getting sleepy while listening to all of that. The moment he closed his eyes, Yuseonal hit him with a chair and said that trash like him should not dare to sleep during his class because they were causing problems for everyone. Yuseonal's strictness also reached the kitchen, affecting even Jang Dubo. He made it clear that the cook could not serve whatever he wanted whenever he wanted. At one point, he even drowned him in his own soup. Life at the reformatory changed completely after Yuseonal returned. He was extremely strict, and he ended up influencing the other guards, who also started acting much more harshly. During a day of extremely heavy rain over the reformatory, the students were forced to take part in outdoor training despite the storm. They were practically drowning in the mud and had to keep their heads down the entire time. Moon Hyunjun almost drowned in the muddy water. One of the guards went over to him and started beating him, forcing his head under the water. Lee Min-soo realized that things could become dangerous, so he knocked the guard down and ordered him to stop that bullshit. Yoo Se-neil approached to discipline the boys, but Kang Yusang tried to stop him. He said that he would take responsibility for them. Yoo Se-neil replied that this was good and handed him the baton, saying that he wanted proof now. If Kang Yusang really had the strength to punish those boys, he would have to beat his own brother right there in front of everyone. To avoid ruining the plan, Lee Min-soo stared hard at his brother, as if telling him that he could do it and that he would endure it. Kang Yusong then showed his method for real. He knocked Lee Min-soo down with the baton and then kicked him in the face, making sure he could not get back up. Before all of that happened, however, the two brothers had already talked in the locker room. Right after Lee Min-soo took a shower, Kang Yusong explained that they could not spend too much time together in the bathroom, or the others might become suspicious. While getting dressed, Lee Min-soo looked downhearted. It was not because of the beating he had just taken, but because he felt guilty. Kang Yusong had been badly hurt while trying to protect him several times, especially during that moment with Yuseonal. Kang Yusong replied that the injury on his face was nothing. He could handle it and would continue protecting both of them from all kinds of things. Lee Min-soo replied that this was exactly the problem. Kang Yusong was trying to protect them from everything and kept getting hurt in the process. Kang Yusong's job was not to be a babysitter. His job was to get Lee Min-soo out of the reformatory. Lee Min-soo was the criminal, and his brother was the guard. The two of them had to carry out their respective roles. Lee Min-soo then made Kang Yusong promise that the next time he needed to punish him, he would do it without any mercy at all. Kang Yusong was proud of his brother's maturity. That was why, at that moment, Lee Min-soo was being beaten in the rain and mud. Kang Yusong kept shouting at Lee Min-soo to get up and continue taking the beating. Deep down, however, he only wanted his brother to stay down. Lee Min-soo, though, wanted to prove that he could endure it, so he dared to get back up. Kang Yusong then delivered another kick to the back of his neck. The hit was so hard that even Yuseonal had to step in and stop him from continuing. Yuseonal said that it was enough punishment already. Kang Yusong replied that he needed to teach him a lesson so that he would never do that again. Yuseonal said that he understood how Kang Yusong felt, but if the boy was beaten until he lost his memory, the punishment would be pointless. Kang Yusong then grabbed Lee Min-soo by the hair and said that he was taking him to solitary confinement. Yuseonil, however, ordered him to take the boy to the infirmary first. It would be a headache if the boy ended up dying. Kang Yusong obeyed. The director of the rehabilitation center, who had been watching everything, commented that the vice director knew absolutely nothing about the aesthetics of bullying. If Lee Min-soo was treated that way, he could never become a candidate. It was at that moment that the director of the rehabilitation center finally received the investigation documents about Kang Yusong. As soon as he read the first few lines, he was completely shocked. Meanwhile, Lee Min-soo dreamed about his childhood, remembering those moments when he became so tired that Kang Yusong had to carry him on his back. When he truly woke up, he realized that he was facing his brother's back. He asked why he was there and asked to be put down. Kang Yusong, however, did not have the courage or strength to answer because he was crying. He did not want to have done that to his own brother. Lee Min-soo told him that everything was okay. In fact, they would have been facing even bigger problems if they had not done it. He then reminded Kang Yusong that the two of them could not give up on each other. He would get out of that hell, no matter what he had to do. To carry out his part of the plan, Kang Yusong continued investigating the restricted area where the special class was located. Suddenly, the vice director, Yuseonal, walked past the door using his access card. Kang Yusong wondered if Yuseonal had some connection to the special class. Yuseonal, noticing his curiosity, asked if he wanted to know what was inside. He said that they could go in together if Kang Yusong wanted. Kang Yusong had no idea that he had been noticed. Even so, he followed Yuseonal, wondering why he was being taken there. The two passed through the restricted access door and arrived at a large hall. Yuseonal stopped and said that, just as he had expected, the director of the rehabilitation center had already made his his move. He then asked if the boy's curiosity had finally been satisfied. He also warned Kang Yusong that it would be better for him not to return to that place. Digging any deeper into the matter would be extremely dangerous. Kang Yusong asked whether that was a warning from Yusunel himself or from someone else. He also wanted to know why Yusunel had shown him that place in the first place. Yusunel simply replied that Kang Yusong should see him as the enemy who had made him beat up his own brother. That left Kang Yusong completely shocked because it meant that Yusunel had known everything all along. Yusunel said that if Kang Yusong had gone to hell, then he should at least pretend to be the devil well enough, or he would be discovered soon. Yes, that had been a warning. When Kang Yusong returned to watch over the engineering room, he asked another guard who that Yusunel was, since he had never heard of him before returning. The guard explained that it was because Kang Yusong was new and had never heard of him before. Yusunel had been investigated on suspicion of asking for bribes. There had been a report claiming that he had taken money from the parents of a prisoner, but he was eventually cleared and returned to the reformatory. There was also a rumor that everything had been a plan by the current director of the rehabilitation center, which was why the two men saw each other as rivals. Kang Yusong thought that this might be exactly why Yusunel had shown him that place and given him that advice. At that moment, the guards became alert because someone was trying to start a fight in the middle of the engineering class. Two rookies were causing trouble until Lee Min-soo arrived to break up the situation, only to get punched in the face by one of the troublemakers. The rookie said that Lee Min-soo knew nothing and should not act like the leader in there, especially since he had already stabbed people outside. Lee Min-soo answered while taking the beating, making it clear that he did not care about the rookie's past. He was trying to be polite, but he dodged the next punch and nearly smashed the rookie's face. At the last moment, however, he stopped his own fist and ordered the boy to get back to work. The rookie answered that he understood and immediately returned to his job. The guard ordered everyone to get back to work and commented to Kang Yusong that everything had become much calmer since Lee Min-soo had taken over as the leader of engineering. Remembering everything his brother had said and seeing that situation, Kang Yusong realized that his younger brother really was growing up. Because of that, he decided to reward him by doing his part of the plan and creating an opportunity for Lee Min-soo to earn more merit points. He called a meeting with the other guards and explained that the next public service location would be a village damaged by a recent flood caused by heavy rain. The volunteer restoration work would be handled by the engineering, maintenance, and cooking classes. Yusunel asked who would be held responsible if any of the prisoners sent to the service managed to escape. The director of the rehabilitation center, however, had heard that the previous volunteer service had gone very well. He liked the results so much that he decided to keep following the same model. At the end of the meeting, the director dismissed everyone so he could speak privately with Kang Yusong. The director of the rehabilitation center approached him and tightened his tie slightly, saying that he had always been curious about Kang Yusong's background. He wanted to know why Kang Yusong had entered as an elite prisoner right from the start. Then he finally understood and asked whether Kang Yusong was not the son of Representative Juxi, the president's arch-enemy who had created the reformatory. The director of the rehabilitation center also asked why he was treating the representative's precious son that way. He then informed Kang Yusong that he would be exempt from the public service mission, which the director himself had created. Later, on one of the buses heading to the volunteer worksite, Ga Sejun and Lee Min-soo talked about how they had not seen Kang Yusong. But Ga Sejun had an even more important question. Who was the person sleeping on Lee Min-soo's shoulder? Lee Min-soo replied that, honestly, he had no idea. He had never seen that person with long gray hair before. When they arrived at the public service site, the cooking, maintenance, and engineering groups began competing against each other. It was practically a war against the water and mud. Because of the record-breaking rain over the past few days, the entire village had suffered massive damage from the flooding. The prisoners saved furniture and appliances that could still be used, while the cooking team prepared food for people who had lost their homes. The maintenance team tried to repair everything that could still be saved. Meanwhile, the strange person with long gray hair was doing absolutely nothing. That person only wanted to find the target and carry out their own plan. Later, during the break, everyone was eating rations, which were actually not that bad. That was when they heard an old man complaining that he would not leave his house. He had lived there for decades, and despite the heavy rain, the house was still standing. The guard tried to explain that the old man needed to leave and go to a temporary shelter because the building could collapse. The old man, however, said that he could never trust those prisoners. According to him, one of them had stolen his wallet. Yusunel asked if he was 100% sure about that. The man said yes. They had started cleaning, and when he blinked, his wallet was gone. As far as he was concerned, it could not have been anyone other than the prisoners. He pointed at Ga Sejun and claimed that it had been that long-haired boy. Then he walked over, grabbed him by the collar, and ordered him to return the wallet, saying that criminals never changed. Yusunel explained that this was exactly why they did not want to do volunteer work there. No matter how good a job the prisoners did, those old people would still see see them as nothing more than criminals and hopeless people. Moon Hyunjun then asked if the wallet happened to be brown. He had found one on the ground a short while earlier and left it at the supermarket. He had not taken a single cent from the money inside. The old man said that he would go check. He even threatened to kill Moon Hyunjun if he was lying and had taken his money. Ga Sejun thanked Moon Hyunjun, but he replied that he had only told the truth. The old man's wife, wanting to apologize to Ga Sejun, handed him an ear of corn. She explained that her husband was still very bitter because one of his legs had stopped working properly after an accident caused by some irresponsible children riding a motorcycle. Ga Sejun thanked her for the food and was touched by the woman's kindness. Meanwhile, Kang Yusong had been reassigned to the reformatory's intelligence department. He thought that sooner or later he would definitely be discovered, but he believed it would be because he was Lee Min-soo's brother, not because he was the son of a representative. When the director of the rehabilitation center confronted him and removed him from the public service mission, Kang Yusong asked if the problem was that he was the son of a representative and whether he was being judged based on something that had nothing to do with his work. The director of the rehabilitation center replied that, in fact, he was only trying to prevent anything bad from happening on Kang Yusong's side. Kang Yusong thought that, in a way, it was a good thing because the director still did not know that he was Lee Min-soo's brother. However, Yusunul knew. Because of that, Kang Yusong needed to take advantage of his position in intelligence and investigate more carefully. He wanted to discover what Yusunul's true intentions were. Kang Yusong also noticed that the rain was getting heavier and ordered Guard Shin to gather everyone. They all had to move to the temporary shelter. The prisoners were not even supposed to think about escaping because everyone was wearing GPS collars. Yusunul was genuinely worried because the rain was coming down extremely hard. Then exactly what everyone had feared happened, a landslide. The mud was coming straight toward the house of the old man who had complained earlier. This time, however, the problem was no longer that he wanted to stay in the house. His wife was still inside. As the house began to collapse, Ga Sejun remembered her. She was the kind woman who had treated him well and given him food. Without thinking twice, Ga Sejun tied his shoelaces tightly and ran toward the house to try to save her. Without looking back, Ga Sejun kicked the door open and rushed inside, causing part of the ceiling to collapse on top of him. The old man outside kept screaming for his wife. Yu Seonal was reporting the whole situation over the phone when Guard Shin showed up and said there was a major problem. One of the children had entered the house. Actually, more than one. Ga Sejun, who was about to be hit by the pieces of the collapsing ceiling, was saved by Lee Min-soo. He asked why Lee Min-soo was there, and the boy simply explained that an idiot he knew was about to die, so he decided to help him. Then, Lee Min-soo told him to forget about the conversation for now and focus on saving that grandma. A short while later, they found her unconscious. They managed to pull her out from under the rubble, but the structure of the house gave way and the roof collapsed on top of them. Wang Hyuk was the first to try lifting it by himself. He would definitely have gotten hurt, but Jang Dabu stepped in to help. Soon after, several other inmates from the cooking, engineering, and maintenance groups coordinated with each other to lift the roof, creating enough space for the two of them to get out with the victim. They even stopped for a moment to celebrate, but that was a terrible decision because a landslide was still happening, so they took off as fast as they could and almost got themselves seriously hurt. Later, the old woman was being treated by the paramedics and was already fully awake. Shin asked Yu Seonal if he was really not going to punish those children for acting that way. While Yu Seonal had been away, the children had changed a lot. In fact, it was not because of the director of the rehabilitation center, since that change had already started when Lee Min-soo arrived. Apparently, the virtue of those children could only be changed by another child, not by an adult. Despite the terrible storm that had happened, the next morning was clear and beautiful. The public service workers began doing more than just helping people, as they also started clearing the rubble and rebuilding whatever they could. The residents' attitude toward them also improved a lot after that. Even the guards were being treated like grandchildren by the grandmas. Meanwhile, Moon Hyunjun was listening to the news about the chairman of Yuksung Group, Moon Hoshik, who had once again failed to appear in court because of his chronic illness, which had been getting worse. Even though that news left him discouraged, Moon Hyunjun went back to work. Ga Sejun was also on his break when Ga Sejmin came over to hand him a juice. That woman seemed to be everywhere. Without showing any surprise, he simply asked how she had ended up there. She asked if he was not surprised to see her, and he replied that he had already expected it since Big Bro was not there. Even so, Ga Sejmin said that she was very proud of him. She had heard that he saved an old woman from the collapse, and asked if he was not the same person who hated everyone else. Dae Sejun answered that he still hated people, but he could not just leave behind an old woman who had been so kind to him. Ga Sejmin simply told him that, even so, he should not keep jumping into dangerous places like that. When night fell, they also went to the temporary shelter, which had been set up in the nearest gym. Lee Min-soo woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and noticed that Moon Hyunjun's bed was empty too. At that moment, even with the collar around his neck, Moon Hyunjun was trying to escape through the bushes. Meanwhile, in the middle of the night, Kang Yusung was trying to eat some instant noodles when a call from Guard Shin interrupted him. Shin was yelling over the phone and asking for help. Kang Yusung asked why he was so desperate, and Shin explained that he would be held responsible for the mistake because Kang Yusung had been demoted. The problem involved one of the children who was under his responsibility. Lee Min-soo took over the call and told his brother that Moon Hyun-jun had disappeared and had probably escaped. Meanwhile, Moon Hyun-jun was taking off his prison clothes, but he could not remove the collar. Because of that, he covered it with something like a scarf. He approached a woman to ask where the hospital was, and she thought he looked like a homeless person. To be honest, he really did look like one. She explained which bus he needed to take and where he should get off, but when the bus arrived, he realized that he did not have any money to pay the fare. It was not difficult for Kang Yu-sung to track him down, especially because he was still wearing the collar. The problem was that Moon Hyun-jun was 4 hours away by car from where the boy was. Guard Shin also could not simply abandon his post, so he could only hand the task over to Ga Semin, who had already prepared her motorcycle. Ga Sejin climbed onto it too, and said that he was going with her to bring him back. Out on the streets, while watching the news, some people complained about that same Moon Ha-shik, saying that rich people were always like that. Meanwhile, Moon Hyun-jun tried to steal coins from a vending machine, but he could not get any. Then, a very creepy guy approached him and said that he wanted to have some fun with the boy in exchange for money. Of course, Moon Hyun-jun ran away. He had completely run out of ideas for how to get money until he spotted a homeless man and his bucket, which had a few coins inside. Later, Ga Semin and Ga Sejin arrived at the vending machine area looking for Moon Hyun-jun, but he had already moved again. Ga Sejin commented that he was so stressed that he could even smoke a cigarette again, but Ga Semin revealed that she was only holding a lollipop. She had quit smoking. Ga Sejin said that she was the reason he had developed that addiction and that she still had the nerve to quit. Ga Semin simply replied that she had to quit smoking so she could kiss someone who did not smoke. Ga Sejin asked who that bastard was who did not smoke, but she was already getting ready to head to the next meeting point. Even then, he kept asking who that bastard was. Meanwhile, in that alley, Moon Hyun-jun hesitated when he was about to steal the homeless man's money. The homeless man himself woke up and told the boy that if he needed money, he could take it. Moon Hyun-jun refused, saying that he could never accept something like that. The man said that, judging by the boy's appearance, he must have a very difficult story behind him. Because of that, he could take the money and pay it back whenever he was able to. After some time, the siblings reached the location where the GPS had last detected Moon Hyun-jun. He might have moved again, but shortly after, they saw a group of teenagers beating up the homeless man. Ga Sejin said that it was not him and that they could ignore it. Ga Semin, however, asked if that was not Moon Hyun-jun being beaten along with the homeless man, and it really was. Moon Hyun-jun was trying to stop those guys from beating the old man. Ga Sejin confirmed that it really was him, and immediately grabbed the arm of the first teenager who tried to hit Moon Hyun-jun. Meanwhile, his sister used her natural tactic and passive skill, charm and incredible beauty. It was impossible to know exactly how it worked, but every man who saw Ga Semin's face ended up hitting on her. Of course, this annoyed Ga Sejin so much that he brutally beat up all three men. Moon Hyun-jun went to check on the homeless man, who said that he was fine and that he got beaten up every day anyway, but thanked him for helping. Ga Semin told Moon Hyun-jun that she had no idea what he was doing, but he needed to go back immediately. Moon Hyun-jun returned the money to the man and left with Ga Semin. But when Kang Yu-sung called to ask what was going to happen, Ga Semin said they had caught the boy, but they would make a stop first. Kang Yu-sung needed to keep the director of the rehabilitation center delayed for a little longer. He said he would see what he could do because a major problem had come up. The director himself was leaving by car to pick up the boy. Moon Hyun-jun guided them to the hospital, and they went to the floor where the VIPs stayed. Ga Semin commented that his family must be very rich, and he replied that his father owned the hospital but was not a doctor. Ga Sejin told him to stop lying like that because he always did it. First, he had claimed that his father owned a huge conglomerate. Moon Hyun-jun only became nervous when they finally reached the 16th floor, the VIP floor. Ga Sejin said that he would trust him, but if he was lying again, he would be in trouble. When they reached the floor, several employees were waiting in the hallways. Ga Sejin was already closing the door because he was scared, but Moon Hyun-jun apologized and asked permission to enter, telling the siblings that he was not fooling anyone. As soon as he took a step onto the floor, every employee greeted him as the young master of the family. Then, he asked to see his father. Meanwhile, Kang Yu-sung realized that if they stayed at the hospital for too long, they would get caught, so he needed to do something. He managed to find a way to delay the director of the rehabilitation center. When the car passed through a certain road, they set up a military parade with war tanks and ended up blocking the avenue. Kang Yu-sung thanked his father for that and apologized for not being able to explain everything at that moment, but said that they had made contact. Now, he would move on to the next part of the plan. The director of the rehabilitation center decided that they should take another route, but on that exact alternate route, Jaek-si was riding his bicycle. After all, he was the president of a cycling club. Kang Yu-sung said that this was the most he could do, and that, from that point on, it depended on whoever was with Moon Hyun-jun. All they could do was pray that they would not catch the boy. When Moon Hyun-jun finally reached his father, he asked if he was okay because he had heard that his father had gotten sick. The man simply replied that he had been avoiding politicians who had been trying to bring him down for quite some time. Moon Hyun-jun was relieved to hear that it was nothing serious, but his father soon asked if he should not have been at the reformatory. Moon Hyun-jun explained that he had been so worried that he went straight there and could not even get in touch with anyone. His father, however, said that he had committed a crime and that it was normal for him to be punished for it. Moon Hyun-jun had joined gangs to beat up children in the the streets, doing things that a normal person would hesitate to do. He had also killed someone. Even if he could control all of that with his power, receiving a punishment would still be unavoidable. Moon Hyun-jun replied that his father was not wrong, but asked why he was the only one who had been punished. After all, why had his brother not been sent to the reformatory too? Moon Hyun-jun was the youngest child in the family, and when he was younger, he did not really understand why he had to eat separately from his father, grandfather, and older brother. He, his mother, and his older sister were kept isolated. They received less food and less water, and still had to serve the table for the most important members of the family. During one of those dinners, Moon Hyun-jun's sister brought him some water and ended up making an unpleasant face. His grandfather immediately slapped her across the face, punishing her for that attitude while flattering his firstborn son. This was one of the richest families in the country, but Moon Hyun-jun and his sister hated that place. On another day, Moon Hyun-jun was kicked by his own brother simply because he had gotten good grades. That meant the firstborn had to get even better grades, but he did not want to study. At that moment, his sister appeared and punched him in the face, making him bleed. The older brother ran to tell their grandfather everything, and because of that, she was beaten by him as well. Of course, Moon Hyun-jun felt guilty about what had happened, but his sister hugged him and said that one day, the two of them would also be recognized. Because of that, the two siblings became even more dedicated to their studies and eventually became the best students in the family. Meanwhile, their older brother became a delinquent, joining gangs to beat up other children and doing increasingly terrible things, until one day he was caught. But thanks to the family name, he managed to get away. When the granddaughter finally got into college, the grandfather was not proud of her achievement. In fact, he was satisfied because she had become a valuable piece who could save the true firstborn son. After so many beatings and disappointments had built up over time, she eventually tried to take her own life. She was taken to the hospital, and the only person who visited her was Moon Hyun-jun. He did not know exactly why she had done it until one day, while walking through the school hallways, he saw his older brother pushing a boy down the stairs. The fall ended up killing him. His brother had literally committed murder and still had a smile on his face. After that, he forced his younger brother to go to the reformatory in his place. Moon Hyun-jun kept doing it and faced everything that happened afterward at the reformatory to save and protect his sister. He then told his father that he had only accepted that punishment to help her, and that his brother should be punished for his own crimes. His father replied that everything was for the good of the family and the business. Since Moon Hyun-jun had been born into that rich family and received many benefits because of it, he should at least make that sacrifice. Ga Sejun asked if his father could really be that shameless and told Moon Hyun-jun to leave, saying there was no reason to keep listening to that old idiot. Ga Semin also said that they were not a real family. A real family cared about each other and did not force someone to make sacrifices for someone else's mistakes. To her, Moon Hyun-jun's life in the reformatory even seemed better than staying in that shitty place. Before they could leave, however, Moon Hyun-jun's older brother appeared with their grandfather. Meanwhile, Yoo Se-anil, while walking through the hallways, overheard some of the people in the maintenance room. Hyun-chul, who was one of the candidates, wanted to earn more merit points so he could go through another review and get out of the reformatory. He was also encouraging the others to do the same. Everyone wanted to work properly so they could leave that place. Yoo Se-ni knew that Hyun-chul had once been one of the monsters of that place, but he had finally become a decent person. It was probably thanks to what Guard Shin had said. Children could only be changed by other children. However, someone in disguise was there to complete his mission. The scene then shifts to the eldest son arriving, and Moon Hoshik asks why he is there and tells him not to show up while he is on probation. He replied that he did not want to come either, but he had ended up getting an injury, which was actually just an excuse to be at the hospital. While their grandfather once again provoked the youngest grandson, the older brother started hitting on Ga Semin, putting his arm around her and saying that she was very beautiful. Before Ga Sejun could smash his face, Ga Semin had already done it herself with a motorcycle helmet. After smashing the idiot in the face, the grandfather naturally went completely crazy. Ga Semin, however, was even more shocked by his reaction, as if the old man had not even noticed what his own grandson had been about to do. He continued saying that she had probably been raised in a poor and badly behaved family. Ga Semin replied that she might have been, but at least she knew that a family was not supposed to fight among itself. A real family shared what it had and did not force other members to make pointless sacrifices. The grandfather asked his son if he was not going to do anything about it. Moon Hyun-jun's father said that he would pretend they had never been there and that it was better for them to leave right then, but the older brother refused to let it go and attacked Ga Semin. The grandfather was happy, thinking that he was going to teach that girl a lesson. Meanwhile, back at the reformatory, Ha Sun-chul was leaving and had left his friend in charge of the last fan in the maintenance room. That was when the infiltrator approached him, intending to take him down with one of the tools. At the hospital, Moon Hyun-jun blocked his older brother's attack to protect Ga Semin. He did not want anyone else to get hurt because of his own weakness. His brother, however, became even angrier at his rebellion and prepared to attack him again, but Moon Hyun-jun's own father did the job instead, knocking him down with a powerful punch to the face. The family grandfather kept complaining about how unbearable his son was while trying to take care of his beloved grandson. At that moment, Moon Hoshik said that he had had enough. He had put up with it for far too long. He had lost his own daughter because of that crazy old man, and now he was about to lose his youngest son too. Manhwa had believed his father's words, thinking that the family's plan would work and that his older son would eventually grow up, but he had already lost too much. That was the price for what he had done. So, he apologized to his son Manhwa and said that, one way or another, he would fix the situation and get him out of the reformatory. The grandfather kept hitting his own son, saying that he did not know what he was doing and had no right to act that way. Then, he called all the servants to get those three out of there. Meanwhile, during the reformatory's volunteer work, the infiltrator had taken down that boy who seemed to be on the verge of death. He said that the boy would never truly be able to escape the reformatory. Even if he managed to leave, the scars from that place would follow him forever. Because of that, it would be easier to deal with the situation that way. At that moment, he heard footsteps and thought Ha Sun-chul would be his next target, but it was actually a guard who noticed the pool of blood. The infiltrator did not give him a chance to react and caught him off guard as well. Meanwhile, Lee Min-soo was back in the bathroom, wondering when they would return. He was worried about the whole situation. Ha Sun-chul appeared beside him while using the bathroom and noticed that Lee Min-soo seemed lost in thought. Ha Sun-chul then said that he did not know exactly what was going on, but Lee Min-soo could always ask for his help whenever he needed it. At first, Ha Sun-chul had completely misunderstood everything because Lee Min-soo was a red uniform candidate. He thought the boy was a very bad person. After seeing everything he had done, however, he realized that he had been wrong. Now, he hated all that talk about candidates in red uniforms. Becoming a candidate had turned his life into hell, and all he wanted was to get out of that place. Because of that, Ha Sun-chul told Lee Min-soo that as long as he kept being a good person, he would help him. Lee Min-soo thought that was cool, but he wished that conversation had happened anywhere else, instead of while the other guy was taking a piss. Meanwhile, the infiltrator was finishing the job with one of the guards. Outside, Yoo Se-yeonal was smoking when Shin walked over and asked if he had started smoking again. Yoo Se-yeonal replied that anyone would start smoking again after going through what he had been through. Shin said it had taken him so long to come back that he had started to think he had joined the current director. Yoo Se-yeonal replied that, honestly, maybe that would have been better. He then asked Shin if he had not been sent to stay by his side specifically to keep an eye on him. Shin confirmed that he had, but explained that even so, the rehabilitation center director did not trust him enough to tell him about the red uniform. Yoo Se-yeonal then asked if finding a missing boy was more important. Yoo Se-yeonal had known everything from the beginning and had been listening to the whole situation. Shin explained that if the director found out, he would pressure Yoo Se-yeonal, using administrative negligence as an excuse. Yoo Se-yeonal replied that the best thing to do at that moment was to pretend nothing had happened. They had delayed the director's route, so the incident needed to be dealt with before that. It would have been nice if everything had gone that way, but things always had a way of going a little wrong. At that very moment, the rehabilitation center director was leaving by helicopter to find Moon Hyun-jun. The next morning, however, everyone was happy because it seemed that everything had worked out. The rehabilitation center director received a cash payment for the work done by the rehabilitation students. Lee Min-soo also received 50 merit points and was still a great model for the photos. He asked the director if he could really take the reevaluation, and the man said that of course he could, as long as he kept working that hard. On the inside though, the director was thinking the exact opposite. He wanted to do everything he could to make the reevaluation impossible and keep Lee Min-soo inside the rehabilitation program. Later, Yoo Se-yeonal called Shin to find out where he was, but Shin did not answer the phone. Because of that, Yoo Se-yeonal became certain that something had happened. At the same time, the rehabilitation center director was beginning to suspect that something was wrong with Moon Hyun-jun's whereabouts. Yoo Se-yeonal, however, said that everything was under control. Moon Hyun-jun was also at the gym. He had arrived with Ga Se-jin just in time. Earlier, in the middle of the night at the hospital, Moon Ho-shik had stopped the employees from taking his son. Instead, he ordered them to let Moon Hyun-jun leave. He was the current head of the family, not that old man, and the employees did not know whose orders they were supposed to follow. Then, Moon Ho-shik went over to his father and shouted at him to stop. The old man did not understand why his son was so angry, but Moon Ho-shik answered that his father had sold one of his own sons to that damn capitalist world, and that son had ended up becoming a criminal. His daughter, who had been pure and innocent, had become a vegetable because of him, while his youngest son was in juvenile detention. More than the grandchildren of that wealthy family, it was his own children who were paying the price for everything that had happened. The old man kept trying to convince him otherwise, but Moon Ho-shik ordered the employees to get the old fool out of his sight. The employees obeyed, and Moon Ho-shik simply told Moon Hyun-jun to leave quickly, before something bad happened. Even so, he also said that he was happy to know his son was healthy. When Moon Hyun-jun returned, Lee Min-soo asked if everything had been taken care of. Moon Hyun-jun answered that it had, but admitted that he had caused trouble for everyone. Lee Min-soo said there was no problem because, in the end, everything had worked out. Besides, they had earned a lot of merit points. Suddenly, however, they heard a scream echoing through the gym. It was Ha Sun-chul, who had seen what happened. His friend was lying in a pool of blood, just like Shin, the guard. Yoo Se-yeonal could not understand how it had happened. Ha Sun-chul's friend was still alive, and said he had not been able to see clearly who had done it, but it seemed to be someone from the civil engineering team, with long hair. Of course, at first, everyone looked at Ga Se-jun. The rehabilitation center director appeared, and said that he had already called an ambulance, but he also pointed out that it was strange because he had not seen Ga Sejun at all that night. Moon Hyun-jun tried to interrupt, but Gae Sejun told him to stop. They could not tell anyone anything about the incident because Moon Hyun-jun would be in serious trouble, especially since he had escaped. On the other hand, if Gae Sejun took the blame for what happened, he would end up becoming a real murderer. Lee Min-soo insisted that it definitely had not been Gae Sejun. Someone else had gone to the volunteer work, and that person had long hair, but nobody had any idea who it was. The name written on the uniform was Park Hyoshin. Yoo Se-yeonal checked the records of the men in the reformatory, but there was no one with that name. Lee Min-soo kept trying to prove that it had not been Gae Sejun, but he could not convince anyone. Then, Yoo Se-yeonal began to think that the whole thing might have been a setup planned by the rehabilitation center director from the very beginning. After hearing all of that, Ha Sun-chul turned against Gae Sejun and punched him in the face, only to be held back by the guards afterward. He asked why Ga Sejun had done it, since he had done a good job during the volunteer work. To Ha Se-won-chul, it made no sense for Ga Sejun to attack his friend, who had never done anything wrong. The next morning, they returned to the reformatory. Ga Sejun was placed in solitary confinement indefinitely, while the investigation continued. Ha Se-won-chul was also sent to solitary confinement for attacking another inmate. He began to develop an intense hatred for Gae Sejun and promised that he would kill him. The leader of the maintenance class, Taegu, thankfully was not in life-threatening condition. However, he had suffered permanent damage to his left arm, which would make it very difficult for him to return to maintenance work the way he had before. Because of that, his release from the reformatory was scheduled. At Guard Shin's funeral, his family was there, including the wife and daughter he had left behind, along with the reformatory staff, the rehabilitation center director, Kang Yoo-sung, and Yoo So-nul. Yoo So-nul was the first to return to work. He tried to act strong, but ended up being the first one to cry for his friend and apologize to him. While working in the engineering room, Lee Min-soo started putting the pieces together. It was clear what had happened. The infiltrator, Guard Shin's death, Taegu being seriously injured and forced to leave the reformatory, and Ha Sun-chul developing that hatred toward Ga Sejun were all part of a plan by the special red uniform class. It became even clearer when Oh Tae-sung continued whispering more details into his ear. Everything was starting to fit together. When Park Hyoshin finally returned to the special class's hideout, she explained that she had left because she had been hiding somewhere else without the vice director knowing. That only made her even more determined to do something. On top of that, she had been suspended because someone had died, and it was not the rehabilitation center director who had taken responsibility for it. While they talked about everything, they were playing video games. Im Ji-soo said that, more importantly than that whole situation, it was already way past time for them to decide who the next candidate would be. The other boy answered that it had to be Lee Min-soo. Ha Sun-chul refused, and that was exactly why they had tried to eliminate him. Park Hyoshin, however, had a better idea. Since the maintenance team leader had been crippled, and Ha Sun-chul was furious, they could make him and Lee Min-soo fight each other. That was why she cut her hair again so she could disguise herself. After Ha Sun-chul was released from solitary, he took over as the leader of the maintenance class. That same day, Park Hyoshin went to him to ask for help with the car because she was not really sure how to do the work. While Ha Sun-chul explained a few things, Park Hyoshin brought up a strange rumor about Lee Min-soo being after him. After all, Lee Min-soo had defeated the two previous leaders, both the cooking class leader and the engineering class leader. Then, suddenly, Ga Sejun had attacked the previous maintenance leader, which meant that he could also have been behind it. Ha Sun-chul asked how Park Hyoshin knew all of that and why she was bringing it up. Park Hyoshin simply replied that it was a rumor everyone already knew. Apparently, Ha Sun-chul was the only one who still did not know. Even so, he said that it might be nothing more than a simple rumor. At that moment, however, everyone realized that the rumor was starting to look true. Lee Min-soo had been transferred to the maintenance class, and everyone immediately assumed that he was trying to take the leader's position by defeating him too. Lee Min-soo tried to explain again that he had never asked to be transferred. It was already the second time they had done that to him. He also tried to make it clear that Ga Sejun had not been the one who hurt the previous maintenance leader. That was when he spotted Park Hyoshin, the person responsible for everything, and recognized her. Lee Min-soo grabbed her by the collar and said that she was the one who had killed the guard and caused all that trouble. The maintenance workers, however, said that made no sense at all. Park Hyoshin did not have long hair, and she was not even part of the engineering team. Ha Sun-chul stopped the fight and said there was still a lot of work to do, and that they could fight later. He also warned Lee Min-soo that he would deal with him once everything was settled. Until then, it was better for him to stay quiet. He then ordered everyone to get back to work. Park Hyoshin was doing all of that for a reason, and in a way the whole situation had messed with her head. One day, an exhausted-looking woman who seemed like she was dying went to a junkyard to get rid of a suitcase. When she did, she felt an overwhelming sense of freedom and happiness because inside that suitcase was her own daughter, whom she hated so much that she wanted to throw her away like trash. Park Hyoshin had learned that if she was useless, she would be discarded. If she was a burden, she would be discarded. If she was weak, she would also be discarded. That was why she sent a few messages to make the guards leave the maintenance room. Soon afterward, everyone gathered to watch the fight between Lee Min-soo and the current leader, Ha Sun-chul. Park Hyoshin was trying to prove her own worth because she knew that if she failed, she would be discarded. Lee Min-soo charged at Ha Sun-chul and asked if he was not going to keep the promise he had made. Ha Sun-chul replied that Lee Min-soo had not done what he had asked, but just as the two two of them moved in to strike each other, they stopped at the same time, and both hit Park Hyoshin in the face instead. When Park Hyoshin was knocked down, nobody from the maintenance team did anything, because they already knew about the plan. Lee Min-soo realized that she had gotten rid of the guards, specifically so that, if they had been there, the truth about the plan would have been exposed. Ha-sun-chul, for example, was doing it for Taegu, as a form of revenge. Then, someone different appeared in the maintenance room, wearing a red uniform. Im Ji-soo asked Park Hyoshin if she had come there to put her plan into action, but instead, he ended up beating her up. Afterward, he asked if she was at least happy to see him. Im Ji-soo then spoke to his friend Lee Min-soo, who asked him to come to him next time, but once again, he had shown up first. Lee Min-soo replied that he could not let Im Ji-soo take that person away. Park Hyoshin needed to explain everything that had happened so his friend could be released from solitary. Im Ji-soo explained that he had not gone there to save her. They were not that close. At that moment, Park Hyoshin realized that she had been discarded. The rehabilitation center director had decided to get rid of her. The rehabilitation center director had a frank conversation with Im Ji-soo and explained that, thanks to Park Hyoshin, they would probably be able to get rid of a major problem. Since a murder had happened inside the reformatory and the vice director would take a while to return, the situation had become very complicated. Because of that, they needed to get rid of the witnesses. Park Hyoshin could become a weakness, so she also needed to be eliminated. Park Hyoshin asked if they were really throwing her away after everything she had done. She then tried to attack Im Ji-soo, but she had no fighting skills at all. He replied that he had hoped she would at least have some brains left in her head. At the end of his sentence, he struck her with all his strength, smashing her head against the floor. Even Lee Min-soo was shocked by the power behind that attack. Afterward, Im Ji-soo grabbed Park Hyoshin by the hair and started dragging her out of the room. Lee Min-soo tried to stop him, but he also took a powerful kick to the face. He could barely see the attack coming, but even after falling, he managed to stay on his feet. Lee Min-soo could fight. He had grown a lot during that time, and Im Ji-soo noticed it. Im Ji-soo asked if someone had taught Lee Min-soo how to fight, and commented that, at least, he had already been selected as a candidate. Lee Min-soo replied that he had never said he wanted to be a candidate. At that moment, he had become so much faster that he even managed to scratch Im Ji-soo's face, leaving him surprised and unable to understand how it had happened. Lee Min-soo promised to take down everyone wearing those red uniforms, but Im Ji-soo grabbed him and said that could be dangerous. He then slammed Lee Min-soo's head into the floor, just as he had done to Park Hyoshin. Ha-sun-chul could not understand how Lee Min-soo had been knocked down by a single attack like that. Im Ji-soo, however, recognized Lee Min-soo's strength. In his eyes, the boy could become an excellent candidate and, before long, could even become part of the special class. Lee Min-soo replied that they were nothing but disgusting people who enjoyed playing with others. He would never volunteer for that kind of job. Im Ji-soo then realized that he was being surrounded by everyone from the maintenance team. That was when more people wearing red uniforms appeared. Among them was the black-haired boy, along with Lee Kang-min, who had also been recruited. Besides them, there was one more person who had just been recruited into the special class, Ga Se-jun. Lee Min-soo asked why the hell he was wearing that uniform, but he soon lost consciousness. Im Ji-soo simply replied that he already knew Lee Min-soo would refuse. That was why those people were the new candidates. Ga Se-jun simply walked away without saying anything to Lee Min-soo, and without explaining why he was wearing that uniform. Meanwhile, Ga Se-min was helping Kang Yusong put on his tie and asked what the occasion was. He replied that he was not exactly sure, but apparently his father was going to introduce him to someone important. Ga Se-min then asked Kang Yusong to put a slightly better expression on his face, but Kang Yusong replied that he was worried about the situation at the reformatory. She said that she knew exactly how he felt, but they had already done everything they could and would continue doing their best. Kang Yusong agreed that she was right. Then, Ga Se-min asked about the investigation into Lee Min-soo's case and the alleged murder. The footprints found at the crime scene belonged to a pair of limited edition sneakers, with only 50 pairs having been sold in Korea. Even so, it was still difficult to track down where they had been produced. Ga Se-min said they would definitely find the owner soon because the sneakers were very eye-catching. At that moment, she received a message about the shoes. Someone had reported seeing a person wearing the exact same sneakers at the school.